Mm. Morning. Good morning. Hey, good to see y'all. Be back with y'all. Hmm. Not icing anymore. Just using heat now, and try to get to heal. Um, but I had excuse me, intended to do a stream Monday and Tuesday. Well, Tuesday at least. But my son came home sick. So yesterday I had to. He was home all day. He's home again today. He's not sick though. They just won't let him back in school. It's pretty silly. There's a sense of like safety, I guess, when they try to do that. Like, oh, your kid can't come back if he's been sick, you know what I mean, for 24 hours. But I find it to be a bit obnoxious because it's pretty one-sided. It's like, yeah, but he got sick for like an hour or two, and then he pretty much didn't get sick again, and he was fine. So it's like, I don't know. Could have been worse. So yeah, it's been a pretty eventful couple of days for me. What I'm looking for on the stocks, I haven't really charted very much at all. I didn't really chart at all yesterday or the day before. So I'm looking for the same moves. I mean, nothing's happened. I checked the prices and just waiting for that breakout, not really seeing it happening. This doesn't look awesome. This is a 5-minute chart though. Let's go up to 15. Let's see how that looks. It's okay. So it's good that it kind of came back. It's kind of bad in terms of timing because it's taken a really, 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 really long time to move out and makes me a bit nervous. I want it to break on strength and I don't want it to be weak. So if you're kind of with me on that, then I guess we would agree that it's okay that it didn't break on weakness back here. But this is some kind of weird distributive pattern right there. And then see, I did like a double top. That's the only thing I saw Monday that made me kind of raise an eyebrow was it came back to like 420s and then it dumped again. So that was kind of my big grumble, I suppose, early in the week. You still haven't gotten over those 418, 419 level very much. And then when we push up to 420, we're getting rejected. So the inverted head and shoulder, which I had placed over here, was timed out based on the entry trajectories and the timing of the shoulders. Didn't work. So like there's that. It just didn't break out. You know, I think it looked like this could have been it, and it just failed to advance again. So it looks like a triple top at this point. It's starting to turn more into a maybe like an ascending wedge or an ascending triangle as they call it. So if you don't know what that is, it's a little bit like an ascending wedge. The difference is that an ascending triangle kind of hits its head on the exact same wall over and over again. So it becomes like a a pattern that can be tradable if it breaks out. It can be a reversal pattern. It can also be a continuation pattern. And honestly, like, I don't find this one to be the most consistent pattern, so I don't particularly like it that much. I've seen it happen on GME where it does this pattern and then breaks down quite a bit. And I think it's just another way of kind of creating like a rising wedge and sort of deceiving the market into thinking it could rise and continue to rise, but it doesn't rise. So it's much simpler than that. If you don't really care to use the pattern tradings, then don't do it. You know, it's pretty straightforward. Like, you don't have to do that. The easiest thing to do here in this situation would be to just draw a line, and when it breaks it and holds it, you're in good shape. And that's at 420s. It's up here in the 420 to 424 range. So even though I wasn't able to stream Monday and yesterday, there really isn't much, I should say, to talk about that has happened that we need to really address, except for maybe that double top here and our triple top here. I mean, now it's 3 times it's hit its head on 424. So clearly, like, if this is bullish, bulls are down here to shore up the $4 region, the low fours. It's like anything else. You want to see that change of character. So one piece of good news here is that after it came back up, it didn't come back and make a lower low. So it made a higher low. That's a piece of good news because typically it's been making lower lows. I will say, based on the way this is set up, there's still a possibility. I don't really want there to be a possibility, but there is a possibility of downside because this early drop here went to 403, and then I do think that as a result there could be a potential here if it can't cross this creek to nosedive. So I'm kind of reluctantly going to be a little bit bearish here because I don't want to be bearish here. I'm going to have to be that way because until I see that break, I don't particularly like that it's continuously rejecting off 424. Like, there's a wall there they don't want to cross. And this has been going on since the 8th. This is not like a short-term thing. I mean, it's short-term, but it's been going on since the 8th. So it's the whole bottom area has been kind of bound by this range. And I don't see it as a positive that it went back up and checked it and then knocked down to try to push to new lows. You just can't really look at that as like a positive thing. So 424. The only positive in this situation right now is that this did make, for now, it made a higher low. So we're gonna wait it out and see what happens. The other positive is that, as you can see on the left side, is it is out of this kind of major downward trend. It's possible, you can always kind of fudge this stuff and make it kind of wider or narrower. That's one of the reasons I don't particularly love curves. I think I've mentioned this before, and it comes across as a little bit of a complaint, and it is to some degree, but the curves in TradingView are pretty specifically one-dimensional. Like, they have the ability to move like 3 points on them, which could give you some flexibility in terms of how you draw it. But in order to get it right, you really need to have that, I'm almost say like a bow and arrow. You need to kind of have the string, and you need to know where the beginning and the end are. And usually it's something like this, where there's a middle point, and that would be kind of like a central way of drawing it. So you can see how this is a little bit silly. Like, the fact that I have to do all this stuff myself is a bit odd. And then you can see here that pretty clearly looks like it ended at the right time, which we had estimated was around the 4th. The way I drew it just now, it looks obviously like more correct. It looks like the 8th or 9th. But then you see how this doesn't really work when you draw it out. It's like, I don't really know how to fix that. So one of the issues that I always have with TradingView is I feel like their curve tool is a little bit, I don't know, one-dimensional again. It just doesn't quite meet the expectations I think I would have for this kind of trading program, where you would have a little bit more options. It's super simple. All they need to do is have like a weighted tangent option right here, and that could fix it potentially. And if you don't know what a weighted tangent is, don't worry about it. So anytime I draw arcs, I'm a little bit cautious, because sometimes it's like, oh, you got it right, and you're like, yeah, sure I did. But then you go back later and you look at it and you're like, well, it could be, slightly wider, and it just depends on which points you use, and da 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 da. It's like the same arguments about any other kind of ambiguity. So I would say right now that it's probably close to, if not done, but I would also caution that there's a kind of a margin of error with this kind of thing. You got to be a little bit cautious. And then you'll also note that this particular way I drew it, it looks like it's pointing towards 380, not where we were. So it's another kind of issue of, well, is it supposed to go lower? Is it supposed to go down to 380s? 380s came up a long time ago in the TA, like a long time ago. You probably don't remember, but I remember, because it was like back here in June or something like that. I kept coming up with like 380s and stuff. I adjusted it recently. I felt like 350s were more reasonable, for the reason that you would come and go ahead and check this like bottom over here. You might as well, if you're going to go down to 380, why not go all the way to 360, 350? It doesn't really make sense to stop there, but anyways, I digress. So, point being, one way to look at this is, yeah, this could be positive. It could definitely be like this slingshot, and it actually kind of looks more like a bow and arrow the way I drew it, which is fun. But it absolutely could be that situation, in which case you're going to be aiming for this marker first, probably again in an SOS kind of format. However, as you know, and we've talked about this previously, that beak is only part one of the story. So there's a lot that goes on into a bottom on AMC, and one of the things that we would expect is, if this hits a low, that it forms some kind of like coffee and bottom, and then it advances. And then once it advances, if it comes back above the top, it then has to find support. And at this point, what we usually see is we see a ramp into whatever creek we're going to ultimately have to cross. So we did a comparison, I think, last week with, and I think it's probably on here, but we did a comparison last week on the difference between this area and what happened in March. And it's very, very, very similar. Now I went back and I added my other stuff back to it, but the comparison was a good, pretty solid comparison. And we used that March example to try to draw out different probabilities and what we thought was likely. And what seemed most likely was, there's an intersection, again, same marker here, it's just yellow. There's an intersection here of that top mark, and in this case it's the high, and in this case you can see it's 573, so slightly different. It's like here versus here, right? That top mark is around November 5th, so it's around earnings. It's around earnings and it's around elections. It's not around necessarily like this week or the 22nd or whatever, 21st. But the idea was that if IWM goes ahead and takes off and breaks out, and it did, and it can make that advance and push above 225, and it's trying, although we've yet to kind of push up above any other highs here. It's hitting that resistance right now. If it can push this and break out in its own SOS, then my thought was that AMC might follow about a week later. So it did do that. It did do that beginning the week of the 8th, but just barely, right? And Friday ended up being kind of this rally day up to like 220s, and then Monday continued it and just continued into this week. As you can see, it's a bit disconcerting to see that S-curve kind of potentially doing a double top here with RSI getting kind of blown out on the hourly. Lately, anytime this has been up pretty far on the hourly, as you can tell, we've very rarely made any further advances. So it's going to require kind of an anomaly event where it happens on like a higher time frame. And in this case, maybe like on the 4-hour, if you go up to 4-hour on RSI, just relative strength index. This does look like it could be a large wave. This is a retest of that trend that jumped. We talked about that. And ultimately like the big macro creek that IWM jumped. And then this could be like a shallow wave, and then this would have to be like a large breakout. So this is essentially like, let me do this way, like this. Like this is the wave here. Okay, so you would use this jump as the breakout, and then potentially this could go pretty high. It looks like on RSI back in that big run up that we had in July, this pushed all the way to like almost 90. So that would be a good place to maybe hang your hat for IWM. IWM is the Russell 2000, and if you're unaware, the Russell 2000 is the small cap index. It's what AMC is a part of, and GME would be a part of that as well. It's not necessarily tiny companies like you might think, oh, it's mom and pop shops. Some of them are small, but like we're talking about, companies worth a few $1 billion, not companies worth, hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars or whatever. Other indexes you might look at, like mid caps is what they call it, is you just shave off the top 5 or the top 100 in the S&P 500, and you do the S&P 400, and that would be like your mid caps. That'd be a good one to look at if you're interested in that. And then the S&P 500 obviously includes the big ones, including like the top 7, which really make up a huge percentage of the moves on the S&P 500. And you guys already know what those are. Those are your Teslas, Apples, Microsofts. A lot of them are tech stocks, Nvidia, then there's Google. These are the companies that drive most of the earnings, let's just say, are the movement. So like there's a huge percentage leap if you remove them. I think it's like a 15% gain if they have them this year or something like that, in terms of like from the place it started or something on the rally, versus like a 7%. I mean, it's really significant. But I look at IWM because typically AMC and GME follow the Russell 2000 more than they follow the S&P 500, which is I think a bit of a mistake to maybe just look at the S&P if you're thinking about small caps. Also, we've been expecting a rotation for a while into small caps. I made good money back here on this move, and we've talked about it pretty frequently. But I think this is a macro SOS with a little, extended SOS continuation inside here as well with a backup. And it's complex. It could be something worse than it looks like, depending on how, I guess, elections go. This is a very charged election year. I'm not big into talking about politics on here, but it is very, very important that you understand the sectors that would be largely represented by each candidate. And it's not equal. So if one candidate wins, certain stocks are going to do really well. And if the other candidate wins, certain stocks are going to do really well. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to sit here and like exposit on that. But don't be blinded by the idea that, politics, it's some kind of a taboo thing. We don't want to talk about it. No. It will affect what money you make come November, 100%. Like it will. So there will be winners and losers. I guarantee it, especially the days surrounding it. It may not be long-term the case for some of these stocks. Like long-term, they might be fine, But short term, there will be stocks that are sold pretty heavily, and there will be stocks that are bought pretty heavily, depending on who wins in November. So very important to take a look at that. There's probably plenty of evidence or plenty of information out there for you guys to look into and find out who you want to like, what stocks you want to back and how you want to weight your portfolio and that kind of stuff. So anywho, I've been looking at IWM as kind of a metric for breakout because typically AMC and GME have kind of followed this a little late. So if we're looking at it from that point of view, I think it's okay to say that, yeah, if this breaks out here and continues up to 250s going into elections, that AMC and GME may follow. They will probably follow a week or two behind, but I think they will follow. So that's why I talk about it and why it's important. Kind of already talked about this on AMC. It just needs to kind of breach really 430s. I mean, I said 420s. That's a localized breakout that needs to happen. But at the end of the day, in order for us to see that advancement, the safer bet would probably not be 420s because there could be like a head fake. The safer bet would probably be looking at like the 430, 440 area up here. And I think this zone, once we get here, you should start seeing, again, that kind of advancement off to the actual outer creeks. And this is where things can get a bit complex. And we already did the arrangement on here. There's a few markers. I don't want to do it all over again, but there's a few markers that matter a lot. And I think these two right here, these are like parallels, are probably the biggest ones that we're going to have to sort of deal with going forward, these two guys. So my thought is that for the most part, when you get out of 430, it should just break pretty quick. Like it might be an ascending accumulation, but I would think it would be pretty fast. It is possible that that lasts all the way until, near November, because you could pocket that move. You don't have to move right away. So it could be one of those things where, again, earnings / elections, and then you move like almost immediately. We don't need to speculate too hard about it. The target's the target, but how you get there could vary. Could be very quick, could be a little bit more methodical. On this chart, I have it drawn out where you're already kind of up here. This one, you could easily see it doing that. But point being is that you're looking at this through the lens of creek breaks, okay? So what you want to do is you want to just look at really just 3 lines. These 3, I think, would be adequate. And so my expectation would be that there would be some kind of a backup here, and then you would advance here and move pretty quickly up. And same deal. You're going to back up probably to 460s, advance 520s. That makes sense. It's across from the previous tops. And then probably, 485s. You know how it goes. Now, that's really slow, but that's generally the way that it should break. Okay. Just an M cross, 1, 2, and then go up to the SOS. I don't expect that this would be really slow. If the operators did a good job building out the range, and they've already done a lot of trading in this middle, and they have, don't forget, this area has been heavily, heavily, heavily traded. At this point, we've been here for a long time, and it's really important to note that because when you look at where the liquidity center is, it's kind of moved up now to 495, and that would be an area that you would whip around. You can see visually it's kind of really close to where I had it drawn out. That makes sense because that would be the place that you would do like a wave. You go back down to the 460 level to check it, and then you would wave around really fast. You go back up to 520, check that. You can see the build out and how almost methodical it is in terms of like where these creeks now are. Like they're intersecting right where they need to at these liquidity markers and at the same levels. It's like it's pretty interesting how tight that is. So this is what I would generally expect. But I don't think that you would have a massive amount of trading in this zone. Like, just don't think you would. So yeah, we're gonna have to kind of watch it when and if it does go. We're gonna have to watch each of these levels and see what happens. But it is interesting to me to see visually how these creeks, these trajectories that were established way back here, are now intersecting these zones where you're gonna need to break, and these liquidity centers and stuff. It's really quite fascinating to see how visually that works, and it should work that way. Okay. So in theory, I think this move, I have it drawn out kind of slow so you can see it, but I think it'll be pretty fast. And I think you're going to end up in this zone around early November. This is just again, this is just a move into a potential SOS. Now, I say potential because at this point, it's not impossible, and I don't want it to be a scare thing, but it's definitely not impossible that this fails. And you need to be prepared for that as a possibility. Everybody kind of, and their grandma, if it ran up here, would be expecting it to continue to like at least 9. And I have that expectation. Don't get me wrong. Like the build out that I did would have it going pretty far, right? We did a secondary build out and it goes up really far, like 9 up to 13 even, you know. We're looking at up in this area here. But in just basic terms, this is a wave that could potentially hook, and this is where that hook would potentially happen. So like when you look at it big picture, you have to then take into consideration that if it does fail, like where would it fail, right? There's really only 2 spots. One is here at $6. The other spot is up here at like $8.75. And those are the 2 main spots that I would expect there to be a potential for an early reversal. So keep that in mind. So this, yeah, could it be an SOS? Absolutely. Could it also be a place that you could have a hook on this wave and fail to continue? Yeah, it's not impossible. It's just not. So in big picture wise, that would just look like a massive, it wouldn't necessarily be like super fast, but it would just look like a massive like cat ear on the big picture. So not scaring anybody, just trying to tell you like that's where you'd want to watch for that. So potentially, as soon as we get above, and we're at 421 right now, as soon as we get above that like 424 mark, if we can hold that and we advance back above 430, 440, that's a potential place for a buy-in. If it holds support here, you're basically looking at just the final creek jumps and then you're going. It could take a little bit of time. Like I said, technically this could be built out real long and low down here, and it could take all the way till November. I mean, it really could because there's a lot of space. But generally speaking, on these beak formations, the entry trajectory matches the exit. So the steepness of the final trajectories here, which are very steep, that's these guys. This is typically about how fast you exit. And that's, yeah, it's a little bit of like theory, but it does play out. I mean, if you look at the overall moves on most of these moves, when they go into these motions, that's typically how they play out. So again, expectation would be you would start advancing and following it out pretty fast. So this is what I'm expecting, but I will say this. Every time I've kind of had this kind of like motion to move out, we've been stopped. And like right now it's at 424. And part of me wonders, the volume being as low as it is down here, and it's very low, if this is your spring and it's low volume, that's fine. It could be just buying with very little resistance, very little sell-off. But ultimately, if you don't get that move back above the floor here around the 430, 440 mark, it's not a spring. So, you know, if bulls can't make that advancement without significant resistance from sellers, then you're in trouble. And it looks like there's a wall at 424. So we're approaching it again right now. This will be the 4th hit on it. Could be the magic break. We'll see. Okay. I want it to be. I do. I want it to push here, get the breakout, and get that move out to the upside. Today, I wouldn't expect it to go, if it does break, I would not necessarily expect it to go significantly higher than 440. If it managed to make this move, you can see there's a drop-off ledge at 440. I'd be surprised if it went well beyond there today. It could do it going into Thursday, push higher, and then maybe Friday land back at maybe 450. That certainly is a possibility for the people that really love Max Payne numbers. That could be the possibility for this week, something like that, right? I mean, sure, that would make sense. Is that what I want to have happen? No, I want to go ahead and start pushing. So I'm not a fan of Max Payne when it's time to break. I think that it shows like a nature of reservation that I don't particularly like when it's time to go. When it's not time to go, going to Max Payne makes sense because it's like the path of least resistance for operators. So it's like, why would they push it? They don't need to push it unless they're trying to do like a fake out at that particular time. And they've done that before where they'll close above it or below it to try to like push one side or the other into the money and those kinds of things. It looks like IWM just got its move, which is good. Got the push over 225. That's good. So, like, I'm not going to speculate more than that. We'll just see if it can break 430 for now. And if it can't get above there, then it doesn't even matter, right? Is it still potentially like a head and shoulder? Yeah, it's a weird one. Obviously, it's asymmetrical. I would say that it looks positive right now. Like, to me, that local break here, which is kind of the steepest trend that you can draw relative to where we are, meaning like we're right here. This is the steepest trend I can draw right there. There's another one like right outside that. There's going to be multiple. Oh, good Lord. Oh, Edgar got a bird, Andrew. And he got a bird. And my cat brought a mockingbird in his mouth. Oh, gosh. What is the deal? Is he just like a really good hunter or what? That's a full-size bird. That's not like a baby bird.
Oh gosh, he really does not like that bird. Oh gosh.
He put it in his food bowl.
Is it dead?
The cat just put it in his food bowl.
Oh, he's playing with it now. Oh my gosh. Is it dead?
Yeah, it's dead. It's very dead.
That's dark.
He's just playing with it. He already ate. Oh my gosh. I have outside cats and inside cats. Oh man, they're jealous. Yeah. Alright, I gotta get rid of the bird.
He's destroying that bird.
I'm not gonna have him tear it up on the porch.
Destroying that bird.
So my cat brought a mockingbird. It's a beautiful bird.
Why would you kill it?
He's a cat. It's a trophy bird, so he caught it.
I don't think it'd sell it.
You can't sell it, Andrew. Yeah, he's gonna rip it apart though. I got it. Sorry, guys. I know it's a bad timing. Oh, stop putting it in the food bowl. Oh my gosh, he's putting it in his food bowl. All right, I gotta.
Ripping that thing apart.
Yeah, I gotta go get rid of it. I'm sorry, cat.
I'm sorry, bird.
Hang on. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm not gonna mute it. I'm just gonna go get the bird. I'm not gonna get it out of here. I don't know what to do. Go get the shovel. The shovel's really far away. Use like a plastic bag. Grab it. Watch out.
Is that you want it?
Oh,
They're everywhere. They're swarming. They were swarming. Like
There's feathers all over the place.
oh, he's probably gonna go back and get it.
I'll wash my hands.
He's probably just gonna go back and get the bird, but
I don't. If he does, he does. He might find it.
I was trying to eat the feathers that the bird lost.
It's the same place I chucked that squirrel. He never brought that back. All right, I'm still streaming. I gotta get back to it. Okay.
Quit.
Oh, what a mess. Pretty interesting. Now he's eating his food, so I guess he's satisfied with his hunt. Gosh. It's gone. I used a plastic bag to grab it and chuck it over the fence, but it's very dead. Bird. Wash my hands. Man. This is the same cat that brought a live squirrel back one day. I don't know if he's a good hunter or he's just like lucky. He does not seem like a hunter to me. Cats are so interesting. Like I know they're excellent hunters. It's like what they're good at, but it's what they do. Watched a nature documentary. They said that they were like basically like they're like the perfect hunter. You just threw out his gift to you. He doesn't seem upset. He's just eating his food. What I find interesting is that he kept placing it in the food bowl, which is fascinating. He's like, this is where food goes, right? Like, jeez. He's just like the sweetest cat. He does not act like he would be a killer. She couldn't hurt the pebbles in her bowl. Oh, man. All right. So, yeah, we're going to watch. Let's get back to it. We're going to watch 424 on AMC. I haven't talked about GME yet. I didn't forget about GME. GME is kind of a weird one because it did come back pretty darn low. It did come back and check an important level. I had marked this off a long time ago. This is a little complex, so bear with me. Tape the bird's head back. Oh gosh. Yeah. It was this really pretty bird. He didn't mutilate it or anything. It was very intact. It was getting that way where it wasn't looking good, but yeah, this is a hot mess. You guys aren't gonna be able to see this anyways. I don't know if you recall, but there was a series of parallels that I drew back here, and I think that they were the ones that were being checked, almost like creeks. The very top parallel here, which goes all the way back to the peak in January of 2021, we've been wrapping around that. So this is a challenge here in visually in seeing it because it definitely doesn't look like any of this happened. Maybe what I can do is just copy these. Hang on. Or at least copy this one. And then let's get rid of everything else so we can see it. Maybe. This is a hot mess right now. My charts are always like working charts. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Let's leave that. So right here you can see the that pinching right there that's going on between where the floor could be, where the downtrend is that hasn't been broken yet. This is the one that's been going on since June 12th. Okay, so you can see that right there. 2310 being kind of that important macro level right here that we want to see break. Like a key breakout level is what I called it. I don't know why I've got this written twice. And then when you look at this downtrend here from the very top, Hopefully you can see it a lot better now. This is the one that is pretty interesting because we double dip beneath it, triple dip beneath it really. But if you look at the setup for that, it's almost like a shoulder here, isn't it? It's almost like a head and shoulder that's like compressing against. So it's absolutely like bottled up, is what I'm trying to say. You can visually see that bottling up. If I were to do a similar treatment to AMC in terms of like the rising target here, I feel like we've already got it pretty much where I want it to be. Like I don't really think I would move it much. So similarly, you would look for like where is the SOS going to happen? It wouldn't be down here at 2310, right? This would be a very important level to hold, but then you would expect the SOS to be near the top, probably around 30. And so where this intersects 30 is like October 22nd, which is pretty early. The other intersection, much like AMC, we've got kind of two. Really, this one's way up here at like 47. So I probably wouldn't use that. I may use this one. And this one's a little more in line with elections on November 8th. So we've got two intersections. So if I were to do kind of a similar treatment, is what I'm trying to say, the same kind of setup that I did on AMC, those would be the two markers that I might use, assuming that it breaks some of these key levels. So also on GME, I had marked off, we hit 425, which means we broke out of that 424. So we're going to go back and check. Just going to go get it, bring it right back. So yeah, this looks really good. I mean, I don't want to be, I said I was being kind of bearish here short term because of that move, but if it breaks out, I wouldn't be bearish. Now I'm looking at it, it looks like it's trying to break out. So you're going to see me flip really quick today to being hyper bullish if it gets above here and holds. I'm really jazzed about this. This is the move that I'm kind of waiting for. I was waiting to see this kind of break 420 or 225. I didn't provide a lot of updates in our Discord. I think the only thing I said was that I was waiting for that 225 on IWM. So I'm really happy that that happened. To me, that's like a big deal that we got above that and we're pushing. And it looks like AMC and GME are following suit. So if AMC can get this move here, we're in really good shape today. It'd be a good day for us to come back and stream. Yesterday, the day before seemed like kind of dead days. And then look at this build out here. I'm on the 4 hour for GME. Look at this build out on the RSI as well. Check that out and look at that that jump here. So it's interesting because as it's wrapping around that top trend and testing it, the only one that was checked was this second lower one. This one, these 1, 2, 3, 4 were all checked on the way up. And these are all the tangents from these peaks coming down. But then on the way back, when they did the backup, this was the lowest one that was checked after the initial moves, the first two moves. This one technically was checked too, I guess. The only one that really wasn't back tested was the lowest one, way down here. This is the one that was like at 12. We talked about this previously. If it's similar to AMC and it does some kind of a move up and it does not advance here, you could see it come right back down, unfortunately, and head back towards this low orange marker in the 12s. It's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. And it would be somewhere around January, which would make sense to be like in this pocket region right here. That's longer term. That's not here or there right now, but that's a potential move back down later. We have to wait and see what happens here and see where it goes. Yeah. So my early estimations for GME was that it's probably trying to redistribute along 43. meaning that if it does happen to breach here and break out, I don't necessarily think it's going to go significantly farther than it's a wall at like 40, but it kind of extends up to like 45. So I just averaged about 43. This marker right here, you can see the distribution that's happening. If it got above that, you'd be in a completely different position, right? In addition to that, there's kind of a rising parallel here. You can kind of see it if you go backwards a little bit on the chart. And this is the middle marker for that parallel. And again, I think that's right around the same pocket. It really goes from like 50 down to 40. It's this zone right here. So that's the pocket that I'm looking for it to hit when and if it goes up. And I'm not necessarily thinking it's going to go way beyond that. Now, I already know there's people out there. I'm not going to sit here and fight it. There's already plenty of people out there that are anticipating AMC rocketing to the moon, and GME would do something similar if it did that. And that expectation might be that this goes up to like the tippy top, maybe around 90 or something. That's really retesting near all-time highs. And then if it managed to continue after that, you're looking at the next set of parallels all the way up to 200s. That, I get it. Like, I'm not, a lot of folks, you know, very openly disagree when I don't think it's going to go that fast. I saw a very similar setup on GME that I did to AMC, which really pointed towards those highs not being until about 2026. But I certainly understand the reasoning behind, well, why not do it now or in January? It's an election year, just like 2020. It's very similar setups, you know. It did break out. It's holding. Why wouldn't we just advance? I think it's just a question of whether you think that this is ready to go. If it is ready to go, and my argument is that it kind of already hit the high it needed to hit on the wedge breakout, although it didn't do it in regular trading hours. I might expect it to go up to 85 or 80 in regular trading hours. That's about as high as I could see it going. And that's similar to like AMC making a phase B top right now, right? It's a really similar setup. But the other argument that I would make is that really it doesn't matter that much. If you need to come back and retest 1275, like, you're going to do it, and you're going to do it now. And so it's not impossible that this does indeed break out and go to the moon, as you would say. But I just wouldn't be surprised if it went ahead and came back. And it's a very similar setup to AMC in that regard. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that right now. But long term, that's what I would say in terms of setups being similar. Both look like they could have decent, huge pullbacks into January and then take off. And it's not a question of, for me, it's not a question of like, you know, will they take off? Like, I think they will. I do, but more like when. And maybe one of the key differences, of course, is that this is a lot more like AMC, right? Whereas if you look back at what actually happened for GME in this time frame, once it made that advancement and it held after that push, it really just starts advancing and keeps going relative to where it is. You would suggest that maybe this does something similar to what happened back here. Like, this is the same support kind of hit. It's very similar if you look carefully at this region from April 2020 through August 2020 has a lot of similarities to what we see on the breakout in terms of, oh, it jumped the creek, like it advanced, it came back, pushed, you know, in a very similar way through those parallels. It's a really similar setup, you know. So if I were going to make any kind of argument, I might make an argument that, like, well, it looks more like, and perhaps they're different, right? Because, hey, remember, this on AMC looked completely different. On AMC in December 2020, it wasn't rising up like this. It was dropping down into a spring. Very different. So you could make the argument that, hey man, I agree maybe that AMC goes down, but I don't think GME follows. And I'd be like, sure, It makes sense because they weren't the same. So maybe instead you would see something, again, more akin to what we might expect on GME, which is something like this. And then it takes off in January, whereas AMC and goes to like 200. Whereas AMC doesn't do that, or going into the summer. That's just a thought, okay? I don't want to get too deep into that right now. Let's just take it one level at a time. My point is that they're similar, but they're also different. GME did something very different in the 2020 breakout versus AMC. So probably not going to be one-to-one again. Just thinking out loud, letting you guys know my thoughts on that. I think it's possible that that they're kind of similar, but they're different, you know. So some folks have said that they don't think AMC could possibly come back down that low, the lows that I've talked about. I'm opposed to that idea because I think this is a macro range, and I think there's a difference in opinion about that. Where if this is a macro range, this is a floor back here, and this is just an auto reaction, and that's the way I see it right now. This is a range, basically, this whole area. And so I see it as a massive range where this could come up to like a phase B top, and then it could come all the way back down to the floor again. And this is where people disagree, and they say, well, it can't do that, or it won't come back down to twos, or this or that. And I don't really want to get into that too much, but this would be like the same as what happened to us in 2020, basically, where we had the phase B top and then came back down. And this is the case that I made on the other setup, which I guess isn't here right now. Is similar to this, but it's sort of like reaching up to highs in this area, and then coming back down low, potentially later in January. Very similar again. If you look at that versus like a GME setup, maybe being somewhat the same, but instead of perhaps GME failing to advance, it does advance and makes the moves all the way up, maybe into earnings or something. Hard to say. All right, so we're probably going to need to come back and retest on IWM. I didn't forget about WTO. I looked at it. I think it was at like 41 cents. So I'm not going to comment on it much until it gets back to 50. There's just not much to comment on. Doge is back up to near 11. Actually, it's 12 right now. Sorry. And I saw it move yesterday back up to 11, and yeah, I don't know what to say. It's really good. I mean, it's a nice clean backup. So it pushed high here, and you can see the hits are like right on the money, right on those two creeks. So there's not really much bad to say about it. It looks like a big advancement with a backup to the creeks. It checked both of them. So Doge is in a really good place right now. I don't know what else to say. Like it's right on the nose. You know, this is one of those charts that I'm starting to really like it because it's actually doing what I would expect it to do. You guys are like, oh, that's good. No, I mean, like, just AMC, you see the moves and it just doesn't happen. Doge is like, I've seen the moves and they're just happening. And it's like, okay, it just clicks. It's sensible in a lot of ways. And AMC is not always like that, but it is, you know, frustrating sometimes how long things take and the diversions they take. So here's what I'd be watching for on Doge. I know a lot of you aren't crypto traders, but I'd be watching for this top here around 13. Just see if it breaks 13. Simple, simple, simple. If it breaks 13, I think it's going to go ahead and push up to this 16 cent mark. That'll be the next place. There's a bit of a zone here that I marked off, but I think it will come up to about 16 cents. If it breaks that, then you're looking at kind of a macro breakout pattern potentially. So all the way back to the top in 2021, all the way through the peak in 2024. I think they're both April. Yeah. So 4 years. And then very similar in some ways to GME. Looks very similar to GME in terms of like that jump here and the backup. So yeah, you just be looking at that potential break above 17. Once it gets past 17 cents, I don't want to say this is like a cup and handle, but it's starting to look like that, isn't it? And we've had pretty much the exact same pattern play out here as well on multiple time frames throughout the history of Doge. I mean, you don't have to be a genius or some master trader to understand that 2,000% plus move that's happened repeatedly is setting up in a very similar way now. And you might say, well, man, it doesn't have to repeat itself. No, it doesn't. But when you look at long-term historical markups, a lot of times they do repeat themselves. Like a lot of times they take 3 to 5 years and then they do a big move, 3 to 5 years, do a big move. You know, and those are the very, very typical in the market. So I wouldn't personally, like I'm not positive it's going to do this, but I'm going to do my best to not overcomplicate it either. Like if the setup is good, then the setup is good. If it breaks 20 cents, it could be flying up pretty quickly over the next couple of years up to like $8 or $9, which is pretty crazy, but it is what it is. That's 11,000% move, you know? So why would I ignore that? You know, I wouldn't. I think locally, I wouldn't necessarily expect it to go much higher than maybe 130, but that's still like a huge move, you know? So it's like 800%. So I wouldn't be sleeping on it. I'm not advising you get into crypto unless you know what you're getting into, but I think it's a really good setup. So it looks like AMC went back underneath 424. Kind of a bummer. Not the way I wanted it to go. But we don't control the market. So if this is a good setup, this should be a break. It should just be like a backup, but I don't know where the creek would be. I don't see it visually where it would be. Maybe here. Could come back pretty low. It could come back to 418 and check. I don't know. That's a tough one. There's not much here to go off of because these are all flat. So because there's three tops in a row, the creek would be flattening out as well in theory. So I'm just going to default and say probably the high liquidity, which makes sense at like 419. So if it does need to back up, maybe 419. Otherwise, we're going to see what happens if it starts advancing back to 430. Crypto tends to be more precise. Well, part of it is I think that crypto's not been tainted by as much institutional involvement. Now that's changing quite a bit. I know that a lot of the big guys, I think it was BlackRock posted an article about them investing more in cryptocurrencies as their picks. And I mean, I'm not saying they haven't been invested. They definitely have. But in terms of like some of these other guys in crypto, they're almost like penny stocks. Like they don't have as much institutional investment. So, you know, I don't want to say the laws of supply and demand apply equally, but they can be a little more steady. Another thing about crypto is that it doesn't stop trading, which is interesting. So a lot of this stuff gets worked out because it's being traded consistently, constantly, all the time. Whereas our market is kind of a mixed bag in that regard. I don't know. I don't really know what other reason there might be. Maybe just, again, there's high liquidity in the crypto markets. A lot of people invest in them. So I really couldn't tell you. I'm just kind of guessing. But they do seem pretty simple to read, so. If my options are about to expire on November 1st, should I roll over my options to extend the day? I can't tell you what to do, but I will say that if I thought the move might not happen until after elections, just as a precaution, I'd do it at least 3 weeks beyond that, but that's me. I tend to multiply by threes and give myself room. In theory, a better investment would be multiplying the months. If it's a month out, then you would multiply it 3 months out. So you wouldn't get anything beyond maybe January or February. Like, that would be about where I'd be aiming. Options are tricky, and there's people who have different strategies. So I don't want to, that's not the end all be all. That's just the way I tend to approach it. I prefer to be a little bit safer with my options because they can get wrecked really quickly, especially on AMC. It's just a very ugly options chain sometimes. So, but yeah, I can't tell you what you should or shouldn't do. You got to make that decision on your own, I think. Man, I know like a lot of people don't invest in MPW, but I need to spend like a minute talking about it because there's a lot of stuff that happened in the last few days. Last week, I know again, this isn't like everybody's favorite, but there's a management issue going on right now with MPW. So they had, just a heads up, they had a director on their board like sell a bunch of shares. That's what caused this massive drop to go as far as it did. It's not pretty. I don't particularly think this is looking very positive right now because it reminds me a little bit of what happened to IWM. Like, it made that advancement and then it drove the price really far low. But what happened in IWM is that it essentially, like, once it made that drop, it almost immediately came back up. And this is what would have to happen for MPW to continue. But they've had some issues with their management team. And when I looked more into the steward, which is I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. We'll go back, look at AMC and stare at that chart. But I do need to mention this. So fundamentally, they've had kind of mixed bag returns. It's a company that, or a real estate investment trust that should have a value of about $12, but instead it's sitting down here at $4.70, mostly because they overweighted their portfolio. Because a real estate investment trust would allocate different amounts of money to different real estate investments, as you're aware, and they over allocated to this place called Steward, and this Steward hospital chain ended up going bankrupt. And they worked with it for a while, but a lot of the reason that this was shorted wasn't actually the problem with, and it's heavily, heavily shorted. Like, it had like a 50% short interest or something ridiculous back in like August. A lot of the reason this was so heavily shorted was because management was kind of misleading about the problem that they had with that tenant, and they were basically saying things were good for quarter after quarter after quarter, and they were strong and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden they were like, oh, it's not good. You know what I mean? Like, as if they didn't see it coming. And so that, I think, hurt the optics on their management team. And then apparently they threw a bunch of money into Steward to try to keep it from going bankrupt. Like, they were giving it loans. And at this point, they've solved that issue. And when they announced that they solved that issue, this thing rose all the way up to 650, right? My concern with that was that it was slightly above the previous top. It was like a penny above. Okay. In theory, that could be seen as a distributive action, because it does kind of appear that way, doesn't it? Like it could be a series of cat ears or whatever. But I hypothesized that it didn't really matter because they had solved this tenant problem. If it came back and checked the creek, which it just passed through again, then it should rebound and have a strong advancement. And I thought, and I still think that it's possible it goes up to like $8 or $9 pretty easily. And ultimately, I think it's aiming for this $10 drop. The problem is that their management has been under scrutiny for a while because of the steward thing, and their what is perceived as kind of a mishandling, like that their board of directors didn't really handle that situation well. And then here, what you have is one of your directors. They didn't sell that much. It's like 20,000 shares. It's not like it really hurts the overall. You got to look at the big picture, right? It's like, did that really affect the share price? No, but the optics of it definitely do, right? And when you look at where that happened, it happened like right on this critical marker here, around $5, 495, 496. This is a company, this is a stock, I should say, that has Vanguard owns like 90 million shares. They own almost 100 million shares in this. There's definitely a sense that this is one of those underdogs that could take off and produce a really good long-term result. But there's something smelly about management and the way they handled the steward thing. And then there's also something smelly about somebody on their board of directors selling shares here. And it happened like last Wednesday or Thursday. It was really recent. So I have to mention that because I've been accused of kind of like trading in a vacuum at times where like you're looking at this, you're not considering like, oh, well, what about the big picture? What about fundamentals? What about this or that? Nothing happens in a vacuum. Typically there's a reason for, these technical kind of moves. And I thought the reason for this technical move was pretty obvious. Like, yeah, there was a potential here for breakout, but it head faked on the 7th and it looked like it was going to go low. I thought it was going to come back and hit the creek and be done with it. And that could come as low as $5. It's sub $5 now, right? Like I thought it could come down to like $5, even like this 490 or whatever, the gap fill, whatever it is. Okay. That was possible, but you can see it kind of just split right through all the supports right here on the 11th. There's this big sell off. So short sellers are still very much active in this. I don't doubt it. And I think sellers are still very much active in this. I think there's a great sense of uncertainty with management, and I don't know what the solution would be to that other than to just like get different directors, but that only happens when they vote and, once in a blue moon or whatever. So it's not like you're going to have any immediate change there. I wanted to mention that because this is one of those situations where it keeps flip-flopping. Like it goes from being like kind of meh to, bearish to like, oh, maybe, and then it breaks out. I mean, and look at that. You can just visually see it. The plunging beneath this daily moving average, which is the 90 on the daily, has been pretty telling. You can even see the support that was given right here at 470. And then just looking at where it is now, it's like it looks more akin to what happened on this first up thrust in May, right? And it looks almost like a distributive action. Like they're going to try to take it low. So I got to caution folks because at this point, I don't know, this could not end well. This could be one of those things that we missed the boat. It like could have, maybe it could have gone up. Maybe it didn't hit those targets for a reason. I don't want to be overly negative. If the market rebounds, and it is showing signs of that today for sure, this could come right along with it. But this would have to be some kind of a short squeeze moment, is what I'm trying to say, because to me, it's like the operators would have to take it the other way. And presently all it's done is plunge beneath pretty much every single creek there is right here, including that, that what should have been support at 495, and it just kind of dropped back down. Now, in terms of just overall retracement levels, it hasn't hit the 786. It's really sitting on like the golden pocket area at the 6.5 right now. That's where the gap was. That's where this bottom was. That's why I would have expected maybe it to go there, but not significantly lower. So earnings is coming up at the end of October. I think it's going to be a really important earnings for this stock. And I think I don't want to say it's going to make or break things, but I honestly think that because of the way that the optics are on this, again, unless your operators just really want to like short squeeze it, which is totally possible, I think that the earnings is going to be very, very, very important, and that's coming up soon. So just be mindful of that. I'm not feeling like I'm jumping ship yet, but this doesn't particularly look good to me either. I would need to see it rebound, and at this point, it's like, why are we coming all the way back down through here, through creeks? That looks very distributive to me. So it's a mixed bag, and I'm not happy about it, and I'm pretty annoyed that somebody on their board of directors would sell shares at a time like this. It just doesn't even make sense to me. So that's a heads up, a little bit of a yellow flag, maybe even getting into a red flag area. It's a bummer. Could be a big winner, but it is what it is. If it's not working, it's not working. So I don't know what to tell you. I've kind of given up all the gains here, and hopefully, if you heard me back here, I said I would not enter. When it came up here, I was like, I probably wouldn't enter until you see what happens. So hopefully, some of you guys dodged a bullet there. Yeah, there's zero reason why this shouldn't be $12 a share, except for the fact that somebody's not doing their job right, because medical stuff was hit hard by COVID, but it's not going anywhere. It should be a no-brainer kind of investment. Like, this should rebound. But if they're mismanaging their funds and not owning up to that, and they're not fixing the situations that are being thrown their way, that's not a good thing. It's almost like, it's kind of like AMC in that way. It's like you have something that should be on a recovery path that, you're looking at other stocks that are like it, and you're like, well, what are they doing differently? And a lot of it has to do with debt. A lot of it has to do with how they're managing that debt, what they're doing to solve the problem. And AMC's solution has largely been to dilute, and that does not bode well for most investors. Even if long-term, I do think long-term that's a solution. Many companies do that, and they're successful long-term. Adam Aaron kind of spoke out of two sides of his mouth when he would talk about the debt stuff. He would, on the one hand, he'd say, oh, well, we don't need it. We talked about this because he said all this stuff this year. On the one side, he said, we don't need it to, well, first he said, we have to be able to dilute or else we're going to go bankrupt. That's basically what he said. Then he said, not that long after that, we don't really need the box office to recover in order to be profitable. And like, those are very, very different statements to make. Right? Very different statements to make. So that's kind of been one of the things that's bothered me the most about Adam Aaron on the whole. Isn't so much like what has happened in the company in the last few years. If you look at the bare bones, and you look at them as a management team and you look at the steps that they've taken, I personally look at it and I'm like, I don't really see a lot of missteps. And I'm just being honest. That's my opinion about it. I don't. There may be a lot of disagreement about that, and we can respectfully disagree. But I think the stuff that they've done, the steps that they've taken to reduce the overhead, to diversify, to build new business models, all that stuff's been mostly good for their company. Dilution is the one thing that kind of rubs people the wrong way because it literally dilutes the value of it's share offerings. It literally dilutes the value of the stock. And it's ultimately, we've come down like 95% or something, you know what I mean? And we're way low below all-time highs. So there's a lot of problems with that. Clearly, shareholders have taken the beating. And hopefully one day that comes back and rewards shareholders, but I don't know. So I think about something like MPW and I'm like, in my mind, the back of my mind, I'm thinking, look, long term, I might be right. Long term, this might be a great investment, but in the interim, why are we not immediately kind of advancing now? Like, what's the problem? What's the hang up? And a lot of it seems to be about this steward thing. Even though they fixed it, what are we doing? Why are we back down here, back to where we were? There's still a significant amount of sellers, and it's included in that apparently is somebody on the board of directors, which is insane to me. Because I'm like, why would you do that? You know what I mean? Like, of course that's going to signal. So it's very frustrating. So I think there's going to be a lot riding on earnings, and I think there's a similar vibe that I'm feeling. Like other REITs, EITs are really doing fine, and MPW should be rallying and blowing off, 100% plus, easy on some of these moves because it's so far behind where it needs to be in terms of its average. I mean, it's relative. It really is very high. Its value in terms of being fair market value, it's like over 100% plus below where its fair market value area is, which is like 10 to 12. It just doesn't make sense. Like, it's just not moving there. It just reminded me a lot of like AMC versus like Cinemark and things like that, where you're like, why is it still not competing? There's a looming debt problem, but it's not as severe as it was. They've managed to push that debt down the road. We had a big rally in May. We have a potential build out here. And part of me is like, okay, just be patient. There's potential here for that slingshot move. From a technical standpoint, there's a lot of strength potentially there in that slingshot move. I'm still looking at pretty huge amounts of gains if it goes up to the 13% or $13. But at the end of the day, it's like, what's really the hang up there, And I feel the same way to some degree about small caps in general. Like, I don't know why it's taking so long to rotate. There's been a lot of disagreement about what happens when rate cuts begin. Most people thought it's going to tank the market. And I found out later that that's actually not true. That was some kind of a myth being spread by, I don't know, internet communities or something, that rate cuts tank the market. And it was really just two outlier events that everyone was looking at. One was the 9/11 year, and the other was which were the terror attacks on the two towers. And the other was the big 2008 mortgage crisis. And those both happened to be coinciding with rate cut years and rate cuts to happen that year. And they were being cited as like this like, oh, this is what happens when rates are cut. And it's always this really huge bearish event. At least from what I heard from people, it was like they thought it was going to really tank the markets. And that's not actually true. Liquidity improves when you cut rates. There's more money in the market when rate cuts happen. There's more money in the economy when rate cuts happen. And so liquidity itself is increased, and that therefore makes the market more bullish. And historically, like it was like 14 out of 16 times when there were these big rate cuts and stuff, like it increased the market the next year. It was not some staggering statistic of like massive drops the years following. Well, small caps would be the greatest beneficiaries because they tend to be more heavy laden with debt, such as like AMC. You're paying less on interest and things like that. You're going to have more liquidity, more cash. Lessens the burden, right? And small caps in general, I've been waiting for that rotation to happen because frankly, like you look at what happened in SPY going back to like late 2023 going into 2024, this has been a historic year for SPY and the Dow and all this stuff. It's like I look at that and I'm thinking about that versus small caps. This has definitely been the laggard of the 3 or 4 major indexes. It's like percentage wise, it's like SPY will gain like 5%, 6% or something, and IWM will gain like 0.5% or 1%. It's just been very slow. And back here in June, I hypothesized, and then it was supported oddly by a article that BlackRock wrote that they were going to be rotating a lot of their positions into small caps, that they were going to be advancing. And then I looked at the BlackRock portfolio. I looked at their particular stock. They've also risen to like new highs at this point. And it's very closely associated with small caps. It didn't look like, it looks a lot like this chart right here. It does not look like the S&P 500. So clearly like your bigger, BlackRock's the biggest or one of the biggest, right? Arguably, it's one of the biggest. It's not the biggest, but BlackRock is huge, okay? And so for a company or a hedge fund like BlackRock, who owns like half the world, to look at small caps and see this as a great potential for a big rise, I personally was like all on board with it. Like, let's go, like watch the M cross happen here and then advance and get to the all-time highs. It seemed to me like it was happening really late, and my expectation was that after rate cuts were announced, that we would probably start seeing that move pretty quickly, and we would already priced in like a pullback here. So I was like, what's the hold up? And it's been a few weeks, it's been some time. So this doesn't seem to be like the kind of rally rush that I thought there might be. And part of that might be because the S&P is still doing well. Like it's still was still kind of rallying, still kind of moving up. There's just a lot of things that you would have expected to happen earlier and they didn't happen. So if people were selling off these big tech companies, and I think to some degree, not selling off is not the right word, but really taking out some of the liquidity from there and putting it elsewhere, that moving the equity around, then I think that it should have happened already. But I think that there's a sense in which that's just being delayed. And a part of me wonders, there's nothing really else behind it. I'm just curious. Part of me wonders if maybe some of that reason is because SPY hasn't really stopped, right? So we had talked about this area here as either it's going to be, is it a distribution or a reaccumulation? That was the question. And if it's a reaccumulation, this could be an LPS, right, which is this yellow path here. And the LPS path would then advance here and probably continue back up to near 600, like at 580s. It's exactly where it should be in terms of the triangulation. It made the right moves, and it's exactly where it should be. This rally is extending. It just keeps going. So that's why part of me wonders if like the reason that this is kind of lagging is because even though there was sort of a mild pullback here, like the rally for the S&P 500 isn't stopping. Does that make sense? So there's not been as big of a rotation out of those mid to large caps into small caps. I think the rotation's been very slow. That's my thought. And I think earnings has been driving, this is earnings season right now. Earnings has been driving the market up. People are still breaking records. They're still pushing and beating earnings. So I'm not saying that IWM is not going to move. I think it will move, but I think part of the reason that we've not seen it make great, huge advances, and maybe why some of these stocks like AMC and GME are just kind of sitting around doing nothing, is that we're not really getting that rotation. It is a theory. I can't prove it. I'd have to see the whole market, all the metrics all at once, but that's my thought. Because I feel like that evidence was all there, that the liquidity should have been moving a little bit out of the large to mid caps and back into small caps now that they're safer. If the economy is good, if jobs are coming back good, and you're getting more liquidity in the market because of rate cuts, some of that portfolio should shift back to mid caps, to small caps, rather, from the mid to large caps. That's just normal market mechanics, but it's just not really happening at a high speed. So, and again, you guys are like, well, that's because elections, Booksy, and I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. I think there might be a hesitation to maybe there's a hesitation to shift those values around too much. There's a lot of similarity in these moves right here, though, isn't there? These two moves. But it's just so different. Like, SPY is pushing to new highs. IWM hasn't even pushed above 220.28. So, do an updated video on what? NNDM? I don't think I've ever even looked at that. So, judging by your name, it kind of seems like you're maybe pumping it a little bit. You're not wrong that people tend to benefit off of war if they have weapons contracts, weapons dealers, and stuff like that. I would have to think about it. Before I advocate something like that. I know, you guys are like, well, money is neutral, Booksy. It is and it isn't. I mean, it is until it's used for something. Obviously, if you're making money off of a move in the market, it's easy to divorce it from like the companies behind it. You don't have to like think too hard about it. But I'd have to think about it. You might be right. So I'm not going to say like you should or shouldn't invest in something. But me personally, like I'd have to think about it. Because I've never actively invested in a military or, weapons dealing kind of security. So, I don't know. I wouldn't want to like advocate something like that and then regret it. You guys are like, why not? Don't you care about the military? I do care about the military. I grew up in the military. But my feelings about that versus somebody that's like fueling profiting off of a war in a place that, has been war torn for centuries. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's a different question than just defense. Defending your country, against attacks and stuff. It's not really the same thing. So, I don't know. I'll think about it. They do 3D printing. Like I said, I'm not gonna disparage somebody else I'm not gonna judge you if you want to invest in that. It's just it's a self-reflection thing. I can't say I've really thought that hard about it, so I would feel silly to sit here and be like, yeah, you should invest in this when I don't know if myself I could, like, if it felt unethical to me, I don't know if I'd want to do it. There's been plenty of stuff like that have come across my desk, so to speak, that I'm like, I don't know. Do I want to touch it? I've thought about things that just not sure about. you know. Just don't know. Like one of the ones is like marijuana. Like that's another one. Like some people have no problem with that. They're like, they don't care. They're like, man, it's good for people that have seizures. It's good for people that have this or that. Medical marijuana is a great thing, you know, CBD and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, I mean, there's medical benefit to it. And then there's people who say, oh, it's harmless, you know, and the war on drugs is bad for, yeah, I agree. Like there's a lot of people that were in jail for years and years and years coming out of the 70s and 80s. Like my neighbor, I know you guys don't know who he is, so it doesn't matter. It's completely anonymous. But my neighbor spent 9 years in prison for drug possession. I mean, it's insane. And he's an old guy now. But 9 years of his life was sucked up, taken from him for like something that's basically legal now in a lot of states. And it's like, how unfair to him, you know? But at the same time, I had one of my high school acquaintances, I wouldn't say he was a buddy of mine, but they died in a car accident, and they were both high. And we lived in a place where the roads were real curvy and swervy, and they just went straight off a curve and into a tree and wrapped the car around the tree, and the two of them passed away. And they were high off their rocker, you know, on marijuana. So when people tell me like, oh, it's completely harmless, I'm like, you know, I don't know, you know. So it's like, those are kind of things that when you look at the market, is you're like, you can have feelings about those things, but then it's like another complex question. Do I invest in that? Because then it's like, do I invest in this thing that I'm not sure about? Like I know parts of it are good. I know parts of it I've had bad experiences with. So it's hard to say. It really is. I think there's a lot of questions like that in the world. And money makes that even more difficult, because then you're adding an element of, do I profit from something? Am I supporting it or not supporting it? You know, some people have very different opinions about that when it comes to stock market investment. Yeah, I don't know. Palantir is probably going to do really well with AI stuff. Lithium is a good example of the moral dilemma. I'm still invested, but reading about the indigenous population in Nevada that's losing their homeland is not great to read about. Yeah, and so it's like the battery technology itself is great, but then the companies that you support may or may not be the most ethical companies. So it's like, or they may not be taking routes that you advocate for. It's hard to say. And then so it's like your investment, it's like so many questions, right? Is investing in that really impacting anything? Well, no. I mean, I would say no, not really. Whether you buy a share in AMC or not probably doesn't affect much. But if the company that's making you money is making money off the backs of an indigenous population, for example, then it's like, okay, well, the neutrality of the market investment itself, though it may be very benign and neutral on your part, is still ultimately like making money off of something that you may disagree with, you know? So it's like, what do I do with that, you know? And I think
maybe the short answer for it all, I do kind of already know, you know, in my heart, I guess. The short answer for it for me is just there's so many companies out there that it's probably pretty easy to find a company that you like, that's profitable, that does what you would view as ethical, and could still potentially make you money. I think that the market's so huge that there's probably no reason that you can't find something else, you know? And that's kind of where I end up usually coming back to. Is like, well, if I don't want to invest in this company for this reason, is there another one that's doing something similar that I can't invest in? Usually the answer is yes. But as a person who's got a microphone talking on YouTube, that's not something I can answer for you guys personally. So you have to make your own decisions. And some people just don't care. I mean, there's plenty of examples of people making tons of money in the market. I mean, look at Buble or whatever his name is. You guys are like, Michael Bublé. I always say his name wrong. I literally can't remember the guy's real name anymore. The guy who made a lot of money on the Great Short, you know, squeeze, and or the Great Short of 2008, wasn't a squeeze, but that's a question. I don't know. Should he have made a lot of money when other people were losing their pensions? And I mean, like, I don't know. There's a neutrality to it in that he didn't cause him to lose that money, but he profited off of it. Michael Burry. I know, but I always call him Michael Bublé. I think it was just a dumb joke from when I said it wrong once, and I was like, that's kind of funny. Hey man, I'm not saying, again, one way or another on marijuana. I'm saying the legality of marijuana is not really necessarily the question. Whether it's good or bad, maybe not necessarily the question either. But the question is like, that's part of it. But it's also, do you invest in something is different than is it legal? You know, that's a different question. There's a lot of stuff that's legal that was once illegal, and there's a lot of stuff that's illegal that was once kind of legal. So it's like you look at the question of legality, it doesn't really define the answer. Our country changes its mind about things like every 50 years, so I think the question of like stock market ethics is a different question. It's probably a reason why I'm not like I wasn't like drawn to the stock market a long time ago. Probably when I was younger, I was just like, yeah, I don't want to be all about the money, man. Corporate sponsors. Bird hunting is legal. I don't disparage my cat for being a cat any more than I get mad at people who want to eat meat for eating meat. Like, I don't get mad at people for stuff like that. You do what you want to do. If you're a carnivore, you're going to eat meat, you know. But choices in the market are choices. Like, I still have a choice. I can make a choice. And I can make a choice that I'm able to sleep with at night. And that could be a choice that I make that doesn't impact anybody else except for myself. Totally fine. And it may not ultimately reflect what I feel about whether something's illegal or illegal. Could just be, well, I'm not comfortable with that, right? There's a discomfort there. I don't want to push the lines. So Burry. Michael Bublé. All right, so right now AMC sitting at 422. Back to the AMC talk. AMC sitting at 422. There's a sense of lull midday here. It's not even really been, I mean, market's been open a couple hours. We're already kind of just chilling out. I think I mentioned it maybe an hour ago now that if AMC were to come back down, 420 to 419 would make sense because, maybe to 418, I'm sorry, would make sense because that's been a gravitational level here. It's essentially like a liquid center, and it would be like a backup. The creek itself locally is pretty low. I want to say it's broken, and you can see like a retracement would take you back down maybe as far as 412. What you don't want is a head fake here where it advances and then starts breaking below creeks. So if it passes below 411 or so, inclined to think that's probably bad, because at that point it's starting to look a lot more like a distribution, or at the very least that it would come back down to the $4 level again. Yeah, it's 10 cents off. Who cares at that point? Well, it could make a significant difference if it distributes, because then it could come significantly lower than 4. So you want to watch that and kind of be mindful of maybe where those levels are. I want to say that the pocket right here, right below that high liquidity, is probably going to be the best place to see it catch, and not significantly lower than that. And that's about as far as I'd want to push it before seeing an advancement. And if it can't advance there, and it does come back down, I don't know. I'd have to look at this as if it's going to go and try to push to a new low. So I'd be looking pretty low. Maybe this pocket at $4. So right here has a potential place if it can't make the advancement now. It's a shame because it does look like IWM made that push. Same deal though. We don't know, if this is going to continue to push. It's got some room on like the 4 hour to keep moving. I think it could have a pretty big rally all of a sudden. I mean, this thing could be pumping up to 230s, 240s within the next few days. But there's also the need for back tests, and sometimes that happens when it reaches the top. You're going to get a little bit of a delay to check out those liquidity levels. We already did a test back to 224 area, but it wouldn't be surprising to see it come back down to 225, lay up on this level, which it has not found support on yet. So even though it's pushed off here, yeah, you're like, well, it took off there. That's support, right? Kind of. It's a mixed bag in the market. Sometimes if you're buying off of a level, people will say, oh, it's support because it's bringing in that demand. But we have to just be mindful that that's not necessarily the case all the time. And there's certainly many moments in the market where you might see that advance off that level and you still haven't really shorted up. There's still a lot of trading that needs to happen there. So it would not surprise me at all, whether it's today or even, half a week from now or whatever, if we ended up needing to shore up this 225, because you can see back in July all the way to now, this has never acted as a real support. So this is absolutely like a wall. And again, you don't want to see like a head fake through this and then close back beneath it today. You need to see it close above. That would be bad if we pushed all the way up here and then came all the way back down and closed like beneath 225. I think that would be pretty negative. That's a more common upthrust. Now, some of you are going to be like, well, shoot, man, isn't there like a gap or something there? Yeah, there is. There's a pretty sizable gap. And so I'm a little nervous that we may have jumped the gun and this could be like a head fake. You just don't want to see it bleed beneath it. It can come back beneath it, but then if it just needs to close above it. Does that make sense? So like if it came back down, whatever, that's just the candle, and then it would just need to come back up and like close above it. And I know that's a lot to move, a lot of movement. The other alternative is just to stay above it today, close high, and maybe Friday or Thursday come back down, and it needs to retest. That's fine. It's a very fine line between distribution and accumulation, or distribution and an SOS, I should say, like an upthrust and an SOS. And one of the things you look for is that daily candle. You don't want to see the daily candle upthrust and find extreme weakness and then drive all the way back down underneath a resistance. That's exactly what happened back here. And it resulted in a massive, massive, massive slide from 228 all the way down to 196. You know, that kind of a move can be really, really bad. So CLOV. Well, CLOV is doing well. I think a lot of people are really excited about it. It's been doing a lot better than it was, you know, for a while. And the setup for it was pretty good. We did look at it a while back. I haven't looked at it in a minute. I don't mind looking at it. I couldn't tell you the last time I looked at it. I think it's been a little bit. Yeah, I mean, from the lows, good example right here of like a Wyckoffean move. This is pretty much like that bottom we talk about all the time too, isn't it? It's very similar. You guys know this bottom already. We talk about it like all the time. It's this mock-up right here. It really is just a, if you look carefully, you'll see it's basically just a Wyckoff accumulation with a spring. So really simple setup, really clean. It looks like it hit a bottom floor here, and then it found a support at 80 cents, and it's just been taken off. It went into an SOS right there at end of July. That reached the top of that range. So there it is. It's as clean as you can get for a Wyckoffean bottom. It's pretty straightforward. So after that, you're looking at this as a, let's see, went to 270. That's a weird number. Kind of like went back to the liquidity center here on this breakdown. I mean, right now it's just in a markup phase. So I'd be a little bit cautious because of how overbought it is. And I think the last time we looked at this, that was the main story. I think I remember going through and looking at this. Yeah, it definitely broke out here. I'm trying to remember what I did. Yeah, it's just in a markup phase for CLOV. So it's being bought and bought and bought and bought and bought. Eventually, it will probably run out of steam. My guess is it's going to be on a retracement level. So do like an inverted retracement, and it looks like, yeah, you can see there that marker that I did around 730, which is that drop-off zone. That's the golden pocket retracement in reverse. It's the 6.5. It's perfect. So maybe 748 over time. And then this is just an estimation on the wave trajectory. Right there. That could have been like the center of it. No.
doing something. She was like opening her mouth and like.
I don't know what she's doing.
It's so weird. She's like sticking her tongue out.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so this right here would be the trajectory in and out that I would look at. So this is a long time ago. Simple enough. So maybe by about spring 2025, if it continues, I think it could make a move potentially up there. Maybe it could be sooner than that, but like it could go there and then chop. It doesn't matter. But you would say that on average, this is what you might expect to advance to about 750 by around March of 2025. But who knows how it gets there, right? That's always a tough one. There's just a number of things that could happen. To me, it looks like it might be, it's pretty divergent too. It's either now or never. Like it either makes the pop right now, not never, I'm sorry. It's either now or way later. Because like I can't see it advancing slowly from here. Maybe that's just my, unless it just keeps chopping like it is. Maybe there's like a lot of chop here. I don't know. That could help cool off the RSI. It just looks really divergent. I'm on the daily time frame on CLOV, and it looks like super divergent right now on this top. That looks like a nice J, like it's going to try to break. So that's what I'm saying. Maybe now it could just extend. This almost looks like a head and shoulder on RSI with a divergence, with the price action, a bearish divergence potential. So, oh, and there's an earnings coming up. It's a pretty volatile moment right now. I think, yeah, it's kind of like maybe now into earnings, you could see it push up to 660. And then if it didn't happen now, then I'd be waiting a while. I think that you'd probably see this come back down. This would have to correct. It can come back pretty far. Since this is the preliminary sell-off, yeah, I mean, you could be looking at a long-term kind of reaccumulation here. See that? So it's kind of a tough one. It's similar to AMC and GME because it could have that move back down into January. I wouldn't put it much farther than that though. So it's just that if it were gonna retest anything, you would think it would come back down here to 270 before trying to push again. And that may make sense also locally. Let's see where the halfway mark is. Way down here at like $2. Is there anything else that's pushing it potentially down? Let's take a look. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not against it. I'm saying that there's setups and you have to kind of just be mindful. There's a gap down here at 2. And then there's a floor way back here at 150. That was the SOS top. That gap's right at the 50% mark. Right here, $2. I think $2 might be likely. It seems like a lot, but if it fails to continue now, just based on where this is, it wouldn't surprise me. It's not that far. It seems really far, but it's not that far. You'd get some kind of a move up here and then probably around earnings. Let me see, where's that at? Yeah, it's hard to say. This is very speculative. I mean, there's a lot of time though. It's a weird thing to look at stuff like this. I feel like it could be easily like both. Like you could get both of them. Like go ahead and make that advancement and then do a 50% retracement and get that gap fill. It's simple. Like finish the move and then get the gap fill. Because that gives you the golden pocket retracement here on the bigger picture, and then it gives you a simple 50% retracement here locally. And that takes you back down to where the gap is. It also takes you to the top here. The thing is like a lot of folks would look at this and think like that's bad or something. But I look at it and I don't think it's bad. So I'm just telling you. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense if everything else doesn't rally till, and it could be maybe something like a bit of both. Again, I'm not sure. We'll see. This is how I would do it. I'd push up, I'd try to do the advancement, maybe finish off whatever distribution is going on here with the selling, and then if you can't make that advancement right away, I go ahead and take it back down, build out along the 50% marker on this move, and then advance again in January with the others. We were talking about like a late advancement, and then come back up. And this doesn't have to stop here. This is just a place that it goes to next. And basically it's a giant cup. Really right now it's already kind of a giant cup. It almost looks like a head and shoulder, doesn't it? 1, 2, 3. And then potentially from that point, I think you could see this rally even farther. This where maybe it actually goes all the way up. You never know. Maybe it chills out into June or July and then rallies again. There's a lot of potential here. Into late 2025. And then this puts you in a position where by 2026, it's kind of back at the top of this wave. And this is what we thought. Anyway, I don't want to make everything the exact same as AMC, but it's very similar. You can see that working out pretty well. There's the build out right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. That kind of move would make sense. Just a thought. Anyways, yeah, I think CLOV could go back to all-time highs at this rate, but I doubt it would do it in a straight line. It would probably take a while. And I mean, you can say whatever you want to say, but anytime I see these kind of continuities, I have to just point it out. This intersection on this trajectory is like basically that January 2026 wave. It's the same wave that AMC and GME and dozens of other stocks are riding, apparently. It's just a cycle. Doesn't mean it has to be exact, but it's a simple enough read. Wave in, wave out. 2026 February is where it intersects the all-time highs again. So that's really similar to what we've seen on pretty much every stock that we've looked at in this basket. All right, we'll wait out the rest of the day, see if we advance to above. I mean, day's just kind of getting going. It's weird. It feels like it's been a long time, but it's only been a couple hours today. We peaked a little early today, didn't we? About an hour in. I've heard all-time highs for December 2025. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close to February 2026, so it's pretty close. I don't know about all-time highs for AMC, though. I would disagree with that. But that's just me. Hey, if we went up to all-time highs on AMC, that'd be awesome. But I don't think that it's going to happen. I think we're going to hit like 80, maybe $90 on AMC, and that's probably going to be it. I personally don't think it's going to go all-time highs just yet. I think it's going to take a really long time to get back there. But I think that if you look at an equivalent move, 80 to 90 from where we are now is basically like the same as the big markup that we had previously. So that's what I think. I don't have a number that's much greater than like 90 or so. Most of the time when I do it, it's between, just being straightforward, it's between like 60 and 88. I don't really know why that is, but those are the numbers that kept coming up. And it makes sense to me because it's almost the same lengthwise move from like 2, then we made that move from 2 to 76. It's very similar to what the setup is now. So what it does is it builds out a case for that macro wave to work out that just really is, to me, very sensible. I mean, I know I've talked about it quite a bit, but it's essentially like coming back up to retest this level here, which is sort of right here. Now that's $100. And then there's another one right here at, I want to say it's at like 64. And then the middle, right there around 80s. So the reason that that comes up so much, and the reason I think that's very probable, has to do with this waveform going back to 2020, and then the middle being around 2023. That overall move here, this falls in line with what we've seen historically on AMC as a pattern that has been made multiple times over the years. This kind of move here. And so the wave itself doesn't complete until way later. And I'm not sure that there's a better case to be made for that other than the ones I've already made. But this is essentially like where I think that wave is. So it's that simple. And it's another part of the reason that this doesn't really bother me that much. I think it bothers a lot of people to think that this could come back down. It doesn't really bug me because it lines up with what we saw back here on this wave where it built out and then it wrapped around before it took off. So the pink marker here represents that wave to the upside. And then you can see like the blue marker, it's essentially the same exact wave. I mean, it's doing the same thing almost exactly, which is kind of cool, but the one thing I would say about this is it gives you a sense of continuity, albeit one thing you might argue is that, hey, that's true, but if you look at that wave, and we've talked about this before, if you look at that move, it doesn't exactly hit that high at February. It actually hits it earlier if you were to do like a one-to-one comparison. And my answer is yes. Like that's all I could say about it. Like, yeah, it's basically like the same thing, but it's totally possible in my mind that that's really like a long-term estimate for where it should kind of finish the wave, but that doesn't mean you couldn't get there earlier, or even make a slightly higher high, for example. But certainly, like if this took off and did something basically exactly the same, you wouldn't necessarily expect it to get there in February. It would get there in the summer, just like it did back here in the summer, right? Are you saying the gap at 210 won't fill? Yeah, not right now. Why is that surprising though? Like, another part of the reason that this is sensible is if you look at where the, and I'm gonna kind of fudge it here because I can't see visually all this stuff without all the things. If you look at where that wave is here, that makes perfect sense for the creek cross, that it would be here. And then if you want to continue, like we can continue that line of thought. Here, let me get rid of some of this noise on the chart. Just the extra stuff. Another way to understand this is very simple. It's just a channel, and we talked about this before because one of the things that a lot of people are disagreeing about is the low. And if you look at this going back in time, you can see that this marker here, which was established in 2014, this trend that was established in 2014 is the same as the parallel for the bottom. It's the exact same parallel trend. And you can see that particular trend in 2014 and then the low that we hit 2021, it's the same exact thing. And then looking at where we are now, this is me not fudging anything, you can just see it visually, is right here, right at around $2, $2.50. So if it managed to do something very, very similar, then the expectation was that, yeah, you come back down here. It would be easy to dismiss this and say, well, I don't think it has to do that, except that when you look at the actual parallel and you look at it compared to like, I don't know, like a weekly chart or something, just look at where this took off and look at where it came down. I mean, it's not like, this is not arbitrary. This is very much like still operating on the same markers. So I don't feel at all conflicted about saying that it could come down here again. And it's very similar to the setup that happened. This is what we talked about weeks ago. Very similar to the setup that happened in 2020. So conceptually, like this having an advancement right now as like a slingshot model, it's already set up to go to 13. There's been a number of evidences provided for us that that's where it could go. It matches with the way this broke right here at the top. And then if you look at the setup here, it's like pretty much identical. I mean, it really is. There's a hyperbolic nature to this, but in reality, these ranges are pretty comparable. Like they're really similar in terms of scale as well. People think that they're like wildly different or something because it just looks different, but it's not. It's basically the same range. So I don't find it to be weird at all or confusing. That's why I said earlier, I think this is just a big, gigantic range. That's what I think it is. I don't see it as a conflicting statement to say that this could go all the way up to 13, then come down, and then take off. And then what's even crazier is when you look at this big picture and you consider these are your cross trends, right? Basically, as we call them on the waveform analysis, is that when you look at this, what's amazing to me is the consistency that you have with these parallels. So then take the parallel, move it up to January, right here, the top here that was created, and then look at the January move. Right there, and you can see it here and here working the same way. And then look at the top, here to here. So when I look at this, I'm not really conflicted at all about potentials. Um, the only real question in mind is like, how high does this go? And like I said, it's usually a range between this like $60 mark and this $80 mark. You can see that the 100 looks like a little too high. And there's a number of ways to kind of do this. This is where things get a little bit muddy, perhaps. Because, and subjective. I'll just say that. You get a little bit subjective because you have to make a decision about where the wave starts. I usually put it in March 2020 and not here. You could put it here and that would make it look higher. You also have to consider where is the actual intersection in the middle, because you could pick any of these three bottoms and there's an argument to be made that it could be this highest one, and that might be where you're getting this guy here in June. There's another argument to be made that you shouldn't pick that one, you should pick the lower one. And in the end, both might end up being correct. You know, we don't really know if one is going to be favorable over the other. Like, they both could be pretty much the same. So this is October of 2025. This is July of 2025, right? Similar to what we saw here in a May to June move. This could be very similarly like a May to June kind of move, oddly. It's essentially just a wave. I mean, this is not complex. This is super straightforward. It really is. I think there's a sense of overcomplication, you know, that I might do sometimes, and people get kind of annoyed with me about it. But like, I personally see this as a very strong, straightforward solution. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. PTON SOS. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not going to say much more than this, but this community tends to be very judgmental about people's targets and things like that. But this is something that I've had for a long time. Like, since this breakdown began here, I really went back. It looks a little different than what I drew maybe very, very beginning of the year. But the first video I made this year in January, I thought we were going to come back up to like 14, like rebound here and come up to like $14 and then go down to 250 or something, and then go sideways and come back up. And the wave that I built for that is pretty much the exact same wave. So I know there's going to be a lot of people that scrutinize the targets and stuff and the timeline, but this is one of those that hasn't really changed. It was a video I made. It said something like 14 and then 1. And it's funny because people think that I actually thought it was going to go to 1, but I made a case that bears were targeting it, but I didn't think it was going to get there. And the low that I actually called out was like 250, which is very similar to where we hit. And I think the video is still up. You can go find it if you want to watch it. But I thought we'd go up to like near $14 and then come back to 1. And it's starting to look very similar to, $14 and then come back to like 250. We might hit 1388 and come back down to 250. Took all year, but I still think that that's what's most likely. Has that already been done? To some degree, you know, but kind of in like a reverse order. And the point of that's not to say like, oh, you see, I was right, but to say like, I really haven't changed this at all. It's gotten to the point where maybe it's even boring for some folks because they're like, well, I hear this every other day on this channel. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but there's nothing really new. Like, that's a good thing. And in the grand scheme of things, this is basically like a channel move. Like, that's good. If you break above here, you should go to the top. It's very sensible. It really is. I find that to be comforting, but I know some people may not. And then, you know, you go back and you look at the supposed random move that happened in 2000 and it drives me crazy, dude. You look at this move back in 2021 and it's like, was this a random Was this a random move? I don't know, dude. Those trajectories are pretty much the same. It was absolutely like pointing that way back in 2018, as if that could happen. I find it to be one of those things that makes me question the whole idea of this meme stock movement as some kind of random event happening. It just doesn't feel random to me at all. Like, I can't unsee stuff like that. That kind of stuff drives me nuts. So, yeah. So, anywho, I think it's very possible it gets back there by next year, late next year, and going into February 2026. I think would be kind of the end-all, be-all portion of it. That's where things get kind of dicey because, in theory, if this is and this is again, the same motif I've always talked about. There's no difference here. This is the motif, right? If this is indeed what we think it is, then there's two possible outcomes. And this is where things get kind of, maybe good or bad. Guys, this has been present the whole time. This is on a micro level all over the place on AMC. It's the way it likes to trade. So that's why I use it as an example, because it's just the way it likes to trade. Like, it's been doing this for a really long time. And I use this as an example all the time. We could look at this and argue that this is a spring. Now, I've had people kind of throw that in my face before, like as a joke. Like, oh, yeah, sure, you think this whole thing's a spring? It's on an angle. No, it's not. There's also a level of support here, here. This would be your potential auto reaction and pullback or whatever, and then you'd have a phase B support. I don't necessarily think it is a spring. I think it's more likely, it looks a lot more to me like the distribution version that happened in, not saying it's going to go down forever, but it looks a lot more like the distribution version that happened in August of 2022 to me personally. But there's two things that happen here every time. I'm purposely like moving these around to make sure that the adjustment on it is correct, because it's very specific. So this is a wave, up, down, up, just like this one is. And the thing that I would look for that's maybe sort of a form of caution is this jump right here has to happen. This hasn't even been tested yet. That's why I'm arguing that I think we need to advance here and check it. Maybe we don't come back down as low. Maybe we do. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It just has to come check that marker. In our case, it's like really low. Ours is like way down here because this set up super low. And then this actually is really high. So it's basically like doing that. It hasn't even made that check yet. So a lot of people think it's just going to take off and bleed through that check. I just don't think it's going to. That's why I've been talking about possibly hitting it, coming back down, and then advancing later and doing that cross later on. So then the other thing that happens is that when you get to the end, this area here has to be breached. And when it isn't, then what occurs, unfortunately, in this waveform is a distribution. So what happened back in August of 2022 is the best example that I could give you. It's almost exactly like this, which looks exactly like the big picture. And in that example, when it came back up, it didn't make it did check here and it did advance, right? It did the M cross, it checked the creeks, all that jazz. When it came back to the top, it created a distribution in 2022 August. And this is where we have like a big sell down. Ultimately, it broke down through this wave here. And that's where it kind of hit the nail in the coffin type deal. And then it started just capitulating sideways and out, so on and so forth, like forever and ever and ever and ever, right? I could totally see that happening with AMC, and instead of coming down super low, it basically fakes out here and then comes back down, going into 2029, which is when the next debt is due, right? And you could see why. It's not complicated. You can see why that would totally be possible. And it could be trading similar ways, like down across that trend, just like it did here. And this is what makes me really nervous about people calling for all-time highs, is that I don't necessarily see why this is impossible. It seems pretty logical to me. And then you're trading basically in a more average zone, 20 to 13 or something like that. This is more like regular trading price for AMC. To me, it looks kind of like a no-brainer. So when I look at this stuff long term, I'm like, yeah, I could see it being a distribution. Your target is before the split. My target's the price that it is. It's at 82, which is essentially like this value up here. Yeah, that's 82 as the chart is now, which is the value that it was on this LSPY breakdown. We found that is a very consistent target. There is another option, which is, of course, that this could break out. When that happens, and this does happen, when that happens, you get to that LSPY moment. You can see why this is very similar and sensible in some ways. You get to this LSPY moment back here, and I should have drawn this a little higher. And this becomes like a, I don't want to say a cup and handle, but kind of like it hits the top and creates a little bowl and then a handle and then it rockets. What happens on this one is that you get a move that's kind of similar to this move right here out. And then that would go revisit the top, the SOS. That would be an actual all-time high check. And that's the alternative scenario, is essentially like a whip around. And then you go back up and you retest the top. This happened in the little micro version of this back in August of 2021, where it came up and it broke out pretty much at that exact same point. And it advanced back through the top. And it did a continual advancement. It did come back through and it would have advanced like again. And then it died and came down. In long term, it was still like that. It made a new high, but it still came back down. And eventually that became a macro distribution, but that's beyond the point. That micro distribution back here, that turned into a macro distribution. But beyond the point is that that would be a situation where you would come up to test all-time highs. And the only way I could say, like, there is a way to do it, to check that, would be to use, there's a cat ear method to identify where that top would be. I'm not going to do that until we're way over here. Like, I'm not going to do it till next year. I think it's a waste of time, or way beyond next year. So I personally don't think there's any point in that right now. So I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to tell you that right now. But yeah, like this is possible, but it would have to be after this moment presently. So basically that's the place for sure. If it broke, you could go back, return to all-time highs and check them again. You know, and that would be around $400 or whatever it is. I want to say that without thinking too hard about it, like I want to just say it's simple, like it's just a simple top-to-top thing. But there's another trajectory in here that maps really well. It might be this guy between these two ears here. Because it should be between this cat ear, which is a confusing concept. That's why I didn't want to do it right now. It's kind of complex. It should be between these two. Like there should be a midpoint here. And then I don't know where it is exactly, but then there should be a trajectory that moves from I guess from this bottom through that trajectory, and that should intersect the top. And again, it's sort of an idea of which direction were bulls trying to go here when they failed before this big drop. And that's really what it comes down to, is like you had a support back here and then you have multiple supports in here. And there was an attempt to try to move towards a particular outcome that failed multiple times. So there should be a confluence, a connection between those. It does work, but I'd have to spend time to do it. It's like during this time period before the breakdown here, before that major drop, there should have been a series of, and I call this a cat ear because it's the second cat ear. There should have been a series of trajectories that were pointing towards a potential rebound. And so we'd have to look and see where that is. Okay, but I've not done that. So you're like, why not just be right there? Your target before the split? I don't know. This would, before the split, this would have been like, yeah, maybe like 12 to 20 bucks, I guess. Because I think 21 was back here. So it'd come back to like that same value, but I don't know. I've done a lot of back and forth on this, and we've determined at different points where people's most likely average is, and it's in that 12 to 20 range. I remember most people are averaging here. And it's not just because it's the middle. There was something else too. There was another outstanding value. I did a little bit of math. Talked about on average where people were buying and what would happen if you had averaged down versus not averaging down. I don't remember which stream that was. But yeah, I think this marker right here around 30 bucks is indeed like the middle marker. And you can see the whip around kind of extends beyond and then below. And then I think it's going to go back up. And ultimately, I think the goal is to get you back to this level, retest the kind of the original or near the original opening price, which makes sense. And then maybe get close to it. And then if you reject, you're going to head back down and wrap around 34. You're going to do some like whipping here until you determine whether you're going to break this or continue down long term. It would make sense to me to do that into 2029. I don't want to say it's going to look exactly like this, but it could be very similar. The situation changes obviously if you break out here and you advance, but you know, that's way in the future. So way in the future. In some ways, it's logical because I remember when Stockfather and I used to do stuff together all the time. We used to talk about fair market value, and we were talking about how comparable it was to other cinema chains. And like you look at like the $12 or $14 range, it kind of made sense compared to other cinema changes without having all the debt problems. That could be a that could be a potential place that you go find, you know, fair market value for AMC or whatever. All right, well, it looks like this is happening, but lower. So I don't know the last time I looked at it. It must have been back here in September or something, because they usually draw outward away from wherever the stock. I should put like a marker, like the last time I look at something. I should try my best to like mark it before the day ends. It probably was here around this time in September. So just to give you some perspective on when maybe we looked at this last, and this is Peloton. Yeah, there's a pretty massive possible wedge here. And I think we already marked off where that breakout it goes. Yeah, it goes up to maybe $52. That's long term, assuming that this doesn't turn around and do some crazy stuff down here, like throwbacks. Throwbacks really affect the price quite a bit. I mean, it looks really similar to what I drew, but it's not what I drew. So it went to, it's like if you took all this stuff down lower, it did this sort of what I thought it would do, but it didn't do it above 523. So I had it marked up, like I'll just put it right back. So I had it marked up doing basically the same thing, but doing it above 523. And instead this went below 523. So is it good to go? You asked about an SOS. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple. So this went to gap fill after building a range lower. It's pumping up, kind of looks like a J, you know, which is sometimes really strong, building back up. The volume here is pretty weak. You see how there's like really strong volume coming in, the volume drops off, that's fine. But then there's really low volume here on this push out until the peak here. That's where you would say like there could be an SOS. I'm inclined to say this is bearish divergence right now because each of these is making, at first it looks fine, but then it makes a new high here on a lower RSI push. However, it did jump, so I'm going to give it a moment because I would hate to say, oh, it's bearish, and it's really not. These kind of RSI divergences can break real quick. This pushes up new highs. This could easily push back up to highs, and then all of a sudden it's not a divergence. That's what I mean. But I would look at the general jump here, see how it lines up, and that's what I'm going to do. See how it lines up with the creek jump. Yeah, so there's a, sorry for the whistle. There's a higher jump here. That's the creek top. It's oddly, it's in like the same place I thought it would be at this time. It just, again, everything happened like way lower. But this is right where kind of anticipated maybe it would move. So this is creek number one. It's up high, it's in the SOS. If it has a throwback, it doesn't necessarily in this case mean that it's going to drop forever and ever. I would look at it in terms of basic trend support kind of stuff and creek support. So this pocket right here around 470, actually looks like the liquid center. That's the space that it would target on a backup. So if it backs up to the creek, it's going to go to 470. That's an if question. Doesn't have to. Nowadays, it's almost like I assume it's always going to if it didn't check it on the way out. It didn't really check it on the way out here. So it looks like a wave up, 1, 2, and then another push, 1, maybe 2, and then you come back down. So I would be cautious about entry at this point. I know it's like, you guys are like, well, it's right on the line. Can it just take off? Yeah, that's just saying, just be cautious because if it drops back beneath maybe 510, then I think it's likely going to go to around around 475. I think it would have to. And so then what you would look for is, maybe unfortunately, it looks like it would probably build this out into late October. So maybe you'd look for like a rally into earnings here and see if it crosses again. And then maybe at earnings or around elections, if it's in this situation, then I would probably just wait. Because that's where maybe you get the takeoff. It looks weird. It kind of looks like almost like a cat ear distribution, but that's not what that is. It's an SOS with a backup. And then a lot of times that backup stays low longer than you think it would. So this backup could actually stay quite low and trade the top here, going into maybe that earnings report on the 30th. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is, and again, it's like this would have to kind of negate itself. The other possibility is this just holds really well. And so as weird as it may sound, this is what I would look for in an SOS. I'd look for a SOS within the SOS. So I know this is kind of bizarre, but I'd look for two things. The support, because you're like, well, when do you actually buy? Well, you look for the support, and then if you saw the breakout and the support here, that's when you would buy, essentially. And you take the risk. It's a risky play. But basically that's what you would do. And then for that point, then you can look at like a bigger picture analysis and say, I think this is going to go up to, $7 or something like that. Probably back up to 660s. It really wouldn't be a huge difference in either of these cases. Like both of them would probably go to the same area at some point. And it's just timing. One has a backup, one doesn't. One's a little slower than the other. The only thing that would be bad in this particular situation is if at some point it loses both of these creeks. So right now, it doesn't seem like it's at risk of losing this other one because it's so low. And so it's like, well, right now we're really far away from 470, or it feels like it's really far away from 470. So you're probably thinking, yeah, we're not going to lose 470. But that can change pretty fast when presented with something like a distribution, because if this went into, let's just say, elections and maybe the results are not what was expected, and this sold down, this really quickly becomes like hyper distributive, because then it's like, oh crap, we're looking at a UTAD. So today on the daily, it already closed above the top twice. So I'm thinking it looks pretty strong right now. This doesn't look like a UT to me. It looks like closed at 540. That's above the top. Closed at 521. Barely above the top. If it keeps closing above the top, that could be really positive is what I'm saying. Like strength. But sure, like if the elections for whatever reason aren't favorable, the candidate that's favored for this particular stock, I think it could frankly just have a really nasty rug pull. And people sell it off, and this comes back down, you're looking at pumping down to new lows pretty fast. So it would just be important to keep that in mind. Yeah, this is a complicated one. Because I feel like this almost could go all the way into like a spring. This is like a auto reaction because it hit the low here, reacted, and then it made a new high. It's the same problem I always run into. Accumulation versus, or reaccumulation, not accumulation. Reaccumulation versus distribution. They're always like really similar. So that's a difficult one. Yeah, but you wouldn't be at a great threat anyways of serious distribution unless it came back beneath like 370s. And then you're looking at that gap. Whoopsie. You're looking at that gap fill. So different story. Could happen, work out anyway here. But I know there's a lot. You guys are like, well, this is a lot, Booksy. I know. It pushed the buying climax, but it did it in my opinion, on what looks like a little bit of a weakness on the strength index. So my caution is warranted. If this were like, and I don't know, it's a daily chart. There could be a situation where like I wouldn't have any problem if this had come lower and then come back down and sideways and this were pushing higher. I'd probably be sitting here saying it's ready to go. I wouldn't be questioning it. Yeah, but so this begs the question, could you come all the way back down? Frankly, yeah, I mean, you could. Because when you look at this big picture, then it's like, sure, like this could have a backup. Where's it going to go? Where's the creek at? I mean, big picture, this could have a backup and come back down to the creek and come pretty far down and come back to the gap fill. So don't write off that possibility for your own sake. Don't write off the possibility that this can come backwards. Totally possible. This is probably like the least likely situation here. That this is like a latent SOS. It doesn't seem very likely to me that that would happen. Yeah. Yeah, so either way, I mean, you're just watching this level. You're watching essentially like the top of the gap. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're looking at one situation or the other. If you're looking to buy in, maybe you could get a quick swing out of an earnings trade here. If it came down to like 487, could move back to 460s, but like, or 560s. But otherwise, that wouldn't really be a great buy-in anyways, in my opinion. I'd probably still wait. The trade, people don't like that, but it's confirmation-based trading. The trade is really here at the top. And because at this point, if you missed the entry down bottom, there's not really a better place to enter than the next SOS breakout. So regardless of whichever situation, the trade is up here at like 560. And then you would just be watching carefully this area around 475 as like that's where your bottom is, break down. So see the difference between these two? Like one of them holds it and continues, the other just eventually comes back and breaks. It's going to be at the same level. It's basically the center here. They marked it off. Traders marked it off by trading around it. So it'll be the same marker. It's the top. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, maybe a different time frame. This RSI looks pretty different. Probably does. Like I said, I'm not trying to be like down on it. I just think that even if this is an SOS, you have backups are always possible to creeks. So if it didn't check it on the way out, it may come back down. And I could see it doing that into earnings and elections just to kind of keep people on their toes. But sure, if it came back up, broke above 560, it's probably just going to go. Simple. Straightforward. Stock trading right there. Yeah. It looks like we're dead today, so man, I like this AMC chart a lot. This is a cool one. This is a cool chart. Sorry. I'm going to take a picture of it. I like it. I think the way I did this one is like, the way I like visually, I like the way it looks. It's simple. I understand it really well. I've done this like a number of times, but I like that one a lot for some reason. Probably because I use primary colors like red, blue, and yellow. So it's just visually appealing. Yeah, man. No, I mean, that's good. The targets are there. I mean, we just find them, right? So they should already be in place when you approach a chart. There should always be bearish and bullish targets in place. So if we found them together and we found the same ones, that's good. That is validation. But sometimes you will find like slightly different things in somebody else, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong or that you're right. It just means that there's other things being presented, like that you may not be paying attention to. So we don't all see things equally the same. Yeah, interesting day. Interesting day. Well, I've been out of it for a couple days. I will tell you that I'm going to get back to a regular pattern of streaming as best I can. Usually what I do is I stream either the morning or the afternoon. I tend to not stream both because I get kind of winded and exhausted. So if you're here in the morning, you catch me at like 9 or whatever, 10. I'm usually only going to stream till about noon my time, and then I'll go take a lunch and I probably won't come back. If I come in the afternoon and I'm like coming on at, I don't know, 11 or 12, then you would expect me to be here until market close. So I'm typically streaming either market open or market close. What I could do, I could probably put that in, I should probably put that in the titles so it makes it easy for people when they're looking at the title to know when it's probably going to end or whatever. This week, I didn't stream Monday on account of just family time together, and then I had this foot injury, but I was able to get back on my regular setup last week. So I've been off. Like the last 2 weeks have been pretty wonky for me. So if you're wondering like why it's been so off, it's not normal. Like it's not been normal for me. So there was an injury that's still injured, and I'm working with it. That's not preventing me from streaming anymore, so that's not the problem. But then my kiddo got sick, and I didn't stream yesterday as a result, and Monday, and so it's just been a really off couple of weeks. My goal is never to leave you guys hanging, but sometimes life is just life, and you just don't get around to it. So I try my best to keep the Discord semi-updated. I don't post a lot of posts, like the written posts on YouTube. So if you're somebody that's wondering like, hey, could you do that more or this more? I don't do that because YouTube, it invites anybody and their grandma to comment. I can make it subscribers only, but even within the subscriber base that I have, I get a lot of people who like spam stuff. So one thing that bothers me about that is just comments, and I can't turn them off for posts. I frankly would prefer to not have comments. It's just obnoxious. I got rid of them years ago at this point because most of them are mean, you know. Not most, but a lot of them are kind of mean. So like, I just don't like it. I don't like having to sort through that and shift through it. I don't post a lot of update videos, and that's something that I've been asked about a few times because people don't want to have to go back and scrub through streams. They want the quick and short answers. There's a reason that I got away from it, and it's mostly because of burnout. Like just doing a 3 to 4 hour stream, I'm pretty exhausted. And then when I take a break and go do other things, I don't typically want to come back and do it again. So that's one of the things that, I mean, it's just straightforward. Like, I don't look at this as like, this is like a primary business or something where I'm trying to like crank out video content in order to hit XYZ targets or something. Like, that's not really what I'm doing here. So I feel free to like not do those updates. But I completely understand. I really do. I totally get it. There's people who like kind of interested in what I have to say, but they don't have the time. So I've been trying to figure out like maybe what that might look like. Long story short, updates through the Discord will happen on days where I'm not streaming. I usually only do half days here or there. I will attempt my best I think I'm going to do like a Sunday or Monday stream, like an outlook, kind of weekly outlook or weekly recap / weekly outlook, just to kind of turn the week. I think that's a good thing for people if I can be consistent with it. To have consistency in that would give some folks the ability to kind of tune in, where otherwise this has been largely like a waste of a subscription for them, because some people subscribed back when I was doing a lot of those video updates, and I'm not doing that anymore. For members, for those of you who are members, that's different. Right now, there's not a huge amount of member exclusive content by any means, but I do want that to change in the future. And so that's another thing I'm working on. I mentioned previously that membership, totally optional, but you are helping to support young people in martial arts. And I'm already working with martial arts instructors to build sponsorship programs. I was able to sell a lot more of those principal artwork that I did. I've got like 4 orders right now, which is great. So there's going to be opportunity, to contribute if you want, but membership is going 100% towards that and that cause. And so it is not lining my pockets or something like that. So if you do appreciate the work that I'm doing, I would love to have that membership, but it's totally optional. And it's not something I'm going to use. It's going to be going towards like a pay it forward kind of thing. So that's what I choose to do. That's what I'm choosing to do with it. I can't give you more information than that at this time about that, but that's what's happening. So status update, that's like the complete status update on all this stuff. Some of you guys are like, well, I just come in to hear the stock talk. I don't care about what your plans are for the future. You need to know I'm going to work on trying to be better about like weekly updates. I'm still going to have the membership thing. I'm going to try to expand that in the future. I will do half-day streams as often as I can. These last 2 weeks were kind of off for me. And then Discord updates are just kind of semi-regular. I try to update when I'm not streaming, but it's never like guaranteed. It's just every now and then I'll do that. I think that covers it. So I just wanted to kind of give you a state of the union, so to speak, on what I'm doing with this and what I want to change and improve on, and then things that I don't particularly care that much about, but I'm going to, again, try to improve on those as well. Every day that we come on, one more thing real quick, is an opportunity to get requests. And so I try my best when folks request things to occasionally look at them. I don't promise anything. So if like you come on and request something, I may or may not look at it at that moment. It's basically just as I can or as I'm able. And sometimes I won't do it for certain reasons, but for the most part, I try to honor requests. The issue with requests is that typically happens after like the bulk of the conversation is done. And when viewership gets kind of low and people are on their way out, a lot of times those requests kind of drive people away from the stream. Again, numbers aren't the most important thing to me, but it's important to note, like, I don't do them sometimes for that reason. Like if we're in like the hot zone of the day, usually about an hour into the trading day, that's when people like to come on and get the updates. So if you come on at like 9 or 10 a.m., something like that, Central Time, I'm probably not going to do your request right away. I'm probably going to be talking about AMC because I know that's when people are on there the most to look for that. As the day kind of goes on, totally cool, I'll do requests. And some days I don't get to it. It's nothing personal. Just ask me again the next day. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that real quick because I think there's a question also about why I look at certain things more than others. And it's what I want to look at, but also because I have the greatest ability to impact and to help people at certain times of the day with things like AMC, for example, and GME. And other stuff that I look at, maybe it's good, like to look at MPW and to let you know what I think and what's going on. But we don't have to look at this very often. And same goes for a lot of these other guys. It's like, yeah, they're there. We could look at them all the time, but it's good for me to kind of have like a, maybe if you call it like the bread and butter, you know what I mean, like the central meat and potatoes rather of the stream. So that's it. I'm not going to talk about that kind of stuff every day, but I just want to throw that out there because it's been a really wonky week for me. And I want you to know that nothing's really changed. I just had a weird week. So that's what's going on. In terms of stocks, let's do our recap here. So IWM pushing 226, showing a little bit of a weakness, but if it closes above 225, I'd probably be pretty happy today. I don't know if I care that much for immediate continuation. I just want it to close above that level. That could be considered a breakaway gap, but I don't think it constitutes that very much because of the volume. It's not really that high. On the big picture, it's pretty mild. So I don't know. It's good buying volume. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just not sure I'd call it a breakaway. If we do an SOS here, then come back down, then I'd be very considerate of that 222 level or 223 to 222 level as a possible place to pull back to in the future. For now, we're above it. Let's stay above it. That's what we want. For AMC, once again, it's kind of like it's just not wanting to advance here. So you have like 1, 2, 3 attempts to push over 424. Somebody just really selling it like this is the sell wall. And so buyers have yet to advance. And the first couple times they held 414 and tried to push against 424 and were basically just range bound there. And then sellers were able to sort of sniff out the blood in the water and they dumped it beneath 414 only to get that higher low built out and then push up again and advance. So now it's jumped what I think we would consider to be the creek, the local creek here. I think it's getting really close, if not right on the precipice of a break, but it hasn't happened yet. And you can't have this kind of motion right here and call that really bearish when it's high volume into the top and then there's no follow through, no support, and just dropped right back beneath. Both of these candles on the 1 hour closed beneath 424. So for now, there's still like this kind of mild bearishness that I have. I said it early this morning because it's like I'm not really seeing that break yet. And I said I would flip pretty quick if this jumped here and held, but it hasn't done that. So we're still waiting. We're still waiting. I feel like I want to say like it's going to go, but the way it's setting up, it's just struggle right now. Like I could easily see this coming back down to the floor again, based on the way this is setting up at the top. So I'm just not convinced it's going yet. Yeah. And I hate that because I really want it to go, but it's got to make the advance over 435. I guess that's really all it boils down to. And until we see that jump, anything can happen. This could range out and build a longer term range. It's got a lot of time to do that. It just does. So there's no rush. Like the operator doesn't need to go right this second. There is a sort of a precedent to do that, but it hasn't happened yet. I would have thought that the reaction would have come all the way up to 440, but it didn't do that. So instead we've kind of been range bound underneath 424, right? Perfect place to generate a quick micro, and this is what I was saying earlier, but it's a really good place to generate like a really quick Wyckoff accumulation, and that's what this could be, although we just don't want it to go too high there, and I think it's okay. But that would maybe result in like a spring before it continues. So that would be like the last remaining portion of this here, potentially, you know. That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to push it beyond saying, oh, it can't come down to 4 again. It could. We're just waiting. For GME, same deal. Kind of has a similar move here. Came low, building out. Very similar to what we saw here and here. To me, this is looking like just incredible wedging iteration. 1, 2, 3, 4. I underestimated how it would come through here. I thought it was going to come lower, but instead this bottom is formed much higher. I thought it was going to come down. So I thought the wedge would come further down and that this would build out to be the bottom, not this. So I imagine the bottom of the wedge being around 2040, not down here. It's proven me wrong. And you can see very clearly that this looks like a pretty much the exact same price action over and over again. Like you're seeing that build out, build out, build out. Every time, even the movement of it looks pretty much the same. You can see that pump, that rounded pump, the dip, right? And then the double top, rounded pump, dip, double top. And you're getting a similar thing here, rounded pump, double top. It's just really small. I genuinely think it looks like a compression on a pretty big scale, but you have to take it one step at a time. And ultimately, like, where is it not breaking? Well, it's not breaking this wall coming up. And if it breaks that wall, it's going to be violent, probably, and good for us if it goes to the upside. If it goes to the downside, it's not good. Or if it has a head fake and then reverses, it's not good. There's also oftentimes on these movements like a secondary action. One thing that's concerning is that GME didn't make it to 1876 and AMC did. I would not be overly surprised if this did have some kind of weird drop here. And we mentioned this before, I think on a previous stream, that there was a creek that comes down pretty low. I still wouldn't be overly surprised at all if this came down and did come back and test that 1870s area and it did some kind of a reversal, like a really quick double flush. So here, let me do it with this instead. I'm just saying, the easy way out is just breaking above, 2180 and just heading back up to 2310. That's the easy move. That's the simplest move. That's the one that would be the easiest to read. A harder move would be a massive sell down here that comes back on the RSI level. It'd probably just come back down and check, here, maybe on like the 21st or thereabouts, something like that. It'd probably just come right back down to check this level. May not even get that low on RSI. But price action could be 1980, like could just be bottom of the wedge. Could be lower. All right. I'm optimistic that it won't do that for once because it did bounce right off that trend, and that's pretty strong. Anytime we don't pass through something like that and we just kind of bounce off, I tend to be a little bit more optimistic because that is a very strong check on there that didn't break. It'd have to break that again down here at like 2013 or something like that in order for me to be like, uh-oh, So I'm optimistic that it may not do that. If it has a head fake here and then it drops low, it's probably what's going to happen though. So yeah, you can see the whip around on that value. It's like 2170 down to 1868. It's like perfect. So that's the middle right there. So yeah, maybe. So bears are probably trying to do that. They're probably, or whoever driving the price wants to drive the price lower. It doesn't have to be a bear. I think that's what they're setting up for. They're trying to set up for a whip around 2013 potentially. We'll see. It's just a possibility, but we're not there yet. So All right, guys. So what you want to do is chill out today. Maybe set your alerts, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. We're still in kind of the same boat. Honestly, at this point, it almost makes more sense for AMC to go ahead and come back down to 4. I know it stinks, but because you're like, well, didn't it just break out? And shouldn't it just be going? Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, I guess it just depends on this bottom here. But it almost makes more sense that this was an auto reaction with just a double top, since it didn't make another low till it broke down here with a phase B. I think it's fine. I think it's probably okay to come back down to 4 and make a spring. Maybe it's at $4 this week instead of being up at 5. It would be like this going into Friday. Honestly, I don't know, guys. If it did this week, I'd probably be off my rocker excited. Like, I'm being dead serious. It may seem a little ridiculous to be excited about something like that. It could seem bearish to you, but like if it did that, I'd be like hyper bullish going into next week. Because that's a really clean setup so far. This is basically what happened in May. We went down into a tiny version of this, and we did the exact same thing on a Friday. We dropped low. It looked really bad. I mean, it was essentially identical, the move. You remember this? This is almost exactly the same. You see it came down, came back up, then it made a new low, pushed higher, and then it broke down and dropped into Friday. And it's just that clean smushed together, but it's a really simple to read Wyckoff setup. So push up, come back down, make a slightly higher high, break down. Yeah, it's like identical. It's the same move. It's just a little bit wider, which makes sense. WTO popped from 4. If it hits 4 and just takes off, I don't want to say it's going to look like this, where it just bleeds up like that. It's going to be, in my opinion, a little more controlled, but I think we're looking at within about a week or so coming up to 6. This is about a week. So, you know, I think we're going to move up to 6 within about a week, and then we'll see. If it takes off at the right time around earnings and elections, I think we're going to head up and we're going to see if we can pass 877 and then hit 13. So that's my thought. I think we're going to move up here, chill, and then break out after a second. It's a good setup. I'll be really excited if it ends that way Friday. Yeah, you're right. WTO making a big move here. I haven't looked at this today, so don't begrudge it. I'm trying to... Alright, so it jumped that creek. What is that one? Now that was the widening on the ears here. So when it popped there, that was a good pop. This is probably what was being asked of me earlier, because I didn't check it since Friday last week. It was sitting right underneath it on Friday. It popped Monday. Came back, retested low. It looks like it found some footing at 38 cents. So it found like a floor there. Yeah, so this is the level that it needs to break. I have it at 49.88, which is basically 50 cents. My biggest concern with WTO at the moment is it keeps getting really overbought really fast. So it happened back here, and it looks like it's doing a similar thing right here. So I'm a little concerned. It's probably different on higher time frames, but it's not significantly different. Yeah, it looks good on, see, but this is bizarre. See, this move is actually pumping it on 3 hour. It barely moved on 3 hour before. I'm going to have to zoom in. This is really weird. It's divergent, like as all get out right here. We were talking about these bottoms being divergent for a while, though, because they've been like that. I think the argument that I made, I'm starting to remember now, was that it basically did the same thing again. Like it created the same, it just iterated it again. Like they just did the same pump and dump here. So they did like 2 high heels, 2 stilettos. You can see it really easily here with the divergence on the RSI. It looks pretty much identical. So I don't know, man. Now it's finally looks like it's taken off, but I don't know. I've never really seen it do that before. It's like it did it twice. Why is that an issue, maybe, is a better question. I think maybe that's an issue for me personally because it's not going anywhere on 4 hours. It's just like way low. There wasn't even a divergence there. I think it's an issue for me because when we look at this one, those hooks were like pretty high. Like the trajectories were way out here, you know, and those could have been potential pivots. And instead, they basically used those as little pops to kind of divert attention away. Almost like the wave could complete, but it didn't. It just did it way lower, like on the channel. So they ended up being kind of accurate for like certain purposes. Like if you're looking at like the wave measurement, up, down, up, the timing of it was right, but the movement of it was really, really weak. And so every measurement we did fell short. None of it got hit. So what maybe concerns me right now is that you've got a similar dilemma where you kind of did the same thing again. And so now there's another precedence here of like, this doesn't necessarily even come that high up. We'd have to look at this as a channel maybe. It looks like it broke, which is good. And then we'd have to look at it as, all right, waveform up. Here's the cross, the M cross right here. This is probably where it comes back to. And see how it's no longer like way up high. It's like kind of low. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it makes me think of like a range as opposed to like a giant wave just kind of breaking right back out. Yeah, and see how this wave intersection, this orange guy, I didn't get rid of this because I thought that still mattered. It may come back to that later. It looks to me like it's targeting it right here. So it's certainly there as an intersection potential going into like Monday. So same old, same old. I don't think it's worth really getting too excited about unless it comes back above 55 cents. Because if it hits 55 and it rejects, then this could just range out for quite a long period of time. We'd be looking at basically like a huge range. Like it could take a long time. I have no idea, but nothing bad if you bought in at the bottom. You're probably really happy if it went up that high because it's a big move from 33 cents. I mean, that's a 50% move. But if you're somebody that got in a little earlier, like back up here in the 50s and 60s, I don't know if there's a whole lot to really get too excited about right this second. We'd have to wait and see what happens at 55 cents. Yeah, I'll be really excited if this if it does go down to 4 in the way that I think it might. And then either way, I think I'd be pretty excited. If it goes up here to 450. The only thing that could kind of throw me off right now is if it does a double up thrust. If it goes up again and then sells off, that could be bad. That would be like distributive. It's only the only bad thing I can think of at the moment. Because this looks really good. Has a potential for Friday. All right, guys. I'm going to eat lunch and chill out the rest of the day with my son and maybe do some animation work too. Hope you guys have a good one, and we will talk to you later.